Chapter 1558. Last hit? In the sky above, the phoenix that had almost been crippled by Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu shuddered. It looked down at Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu, and a sense of elation suddenly welled up in its eyes. Beating a dog while it was down was something every vicious beast loved to do the most. Even the proud phoenix was no exception, especially when this dog had bullied it before. Ing! The phoenix happily accepted Lin's suggestion, and it spread open its wings before flapping them violently toward Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu. Boundless crimson divine flames fell upon the earth like an ocean, incinerating everything in its path. Naturally, the last hit had to be done thoroughly. The best course of action was to burn Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu into nothingness. The descent of the divine flame was enough to instantly reduce all living beings to nothingness, let alone Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu, whose status was unknown. However, in the next instant, a man covered in injuries and with a weak aura arrived before Lin Yu. He waved his hand and dispersed the god flame that was approaching her. "Don't even think about hurting her again." Heavenly God Jordan spoke in an indifferent voice. "I won't let anyone hurt her again." The phoenix was given a fright by Heavenly God Jordan's sudden appearance. "You think you can protect him?" The celestial Dharch charged over. "I'll take both of you down at once." "Be careful of his ninth divine halo," Black Spirit Snake cautioned. "Let's finish this battle as soon as possible," White Spirit Snake chimed in. The three super mighty figures at the Tao integration pinnacle stage were completely exhausted after battling for so long. Heavenly God Jordan had been severely wounded due to his idiotic maneuvers, and he was now on the back foot. They had already taken advantage of this opportunity to attack with all their might, but they were still unable to land a lethal strike. They also knew that they couldn't afford to delay any longer. They had to kill Heavenly God Jordan as soon as possible. Otherwise, if the situation were to change again, none of them would be able to hold on. Facing the attack of three people, Heavenly God Jordan took a deep breath as he looked at the southern heavenly gate in the distance. Just as he was about to use his final move, a pair of white hands gripped his feet tightly. He looked up and was greeted by the sight of Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's dark, empty eyes. Crack! The divine halo of darkness above his head was filled with countless cracks. Rumble! Above the red sky, a dark vortex suddenly appeared. Then, a cylindrical black divine light containing extremely terrifying power fell to the ground. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu stood up unsteadily under the black divine light, and a peculiar smile appeared on her face as she looked down at Lin and Su Xiaolan. The celestial Dharch, Black Spirit Snake, and White Spirit Snake joined forces to attack. However, she didn't even look at it. As if she was swatting away annoying flies, she waved her hand. Rumble! Boundless darkness spread out in a ring-shaped attack. The celestial Dharch, Black Spirit Snake, and White Spirit Snake could all sense a paramount power that threatened to engulf all things and reduce all existences to nothingness. Bang bang bang! After the violent collision, the three experts, who could shake a domain with a single move, were sent flying. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's expression was completely blank as she made her way toward Lin in a wobbly manner while murmuring something to herself. "My master is darkness, so he's naturally unafraid of all things that are visible to light." Lin didn't care what Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu was saying. He had already been scared ***less by this crazy woman. He had always thought of himself as an unkillable cockroach. As long as he dared to fight in the face of danger, he would be able to create miracles. However, only after battling Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu did he realize who the real cockroach was. Her heart had exploded twice, and she had also been struck by a finger of the heavenly Tao, but she was still able to stand up. Was she going to die or not? Heavenly God Jordan stood silently off to the side, looking at Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu with a grief-stricken expression. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu seemed to have gotten used to her current state, and she began to charge toward Lin and Su Xiaolan. Su Xiaolan carried Lin in her arms and tried to flee into the distance, only to discover to her dismay that she didn't even have the strength to stand up with Enlin in her arms. Enlin and Su Xiaolan were like fish waiting to be slaughtered. They were completely powerless to resist. What do I do? What do I do? Enlin and Su Xiaolan were both extremely concerned as they looked at the approaching heavenly goddess Lin Yu. The darkening sky elongated heavenly goddess Lin Yu's shadow, and it was as if darkness of despair was closing in on her with a hint of slaughter and destruction. The phoenix let loose a cry as the holy nirvana flames fell from the sky. Heavenly goddess Lin Yu raised a hand, and a black protective barrier materialized above her head, keeping the golden flames at bay. At this moment, the attacks of the celestial Dharch, black spirit snake, and white spirit snake also descended upon them. Heavenly goddess Lin Yu seemed to be a little irritated, and she unleashed a palm toward Enlin and Su Xiaolan in the distance. A giant black palm instantly condensed and fell from the sky, bringing with it a great power. If this palm were to fall, Enlin and Su Xiaolan would most likely be reduced to mincemeat. Protect me! Protect me! After swallowing an immortal pill, Enlin finally had the strength to speak in a loud voice, and tears were on the verge of flowing from his eyes. The celestial Dharch, white spirit snake, black spirit snake, and the others all faltered upon seeing this. They clearly didn't think that heavenly goddess Lin Yu would still target Enlin even in the face of so many powerful beings. What kind of vendetta was this? Did she have to react so violently after being showered with love? The massive palm had already fallen upon Enlin and Su Xiaolan. Enlin held the woman in his arms as he bade farewell. Xiaolan, I love you. Enlin looked at the woman before him, and he was just about to kiss her. Suddenly, a petite figure appeared in front of the two of them. Her large hands grabbed at the two of them like an eagle grabbing chicks, lifting the two of them up. Holy F***ck. Enlin was given a fright upon having his kiss cut off. What the F***ck? You're still flaunting your affection at a time like this? You're drawing heavenly goddess Lin Yu's ire again, do you know that? A crisp, heavenly voice sounded beside his ears. At this moment, Enlin discovered that his waist had been encircled by a slender arm. Su Xiaolan was also being encircled by another arm. A massive force erupted. The two of them were carried away at an extremely fast speed. Boom! The massive black palm crashed into the ground, leaving a massive crater in its wake. Enlin and Su Xiaolan had managed to evade heavenly goddess Lin Yu's attack in the nick of time. A faint fragrance wafted through the air. Enlin finally had a chance to raise his head to look at his savior. Her colorful clothes fluttered in the wind. She had a sharp chin, a delicate and flawless oval face, a pair of clear and attractive big eyes, and a refreshing and playful short hair. Even though he was looking up at her, he still felt that she was extremely beautiful. Vermilion bird princess. Enlin let loose a cry of surprise and elation. I'm going to toss you out of my hand if you keep talking, the vermilion bird princess said with an enraged expression. She was planning to stand by and watch from the sidelines without interfering. However, she couldn't help but step in after seeing that Enlin was about to be slapped to death. For some inexplicable reason, Zhang Xian's mind went blank. Without any hesitation, he made this decision. This D********** impulse. The vermilion bird princess was extremely irritable. Chapter 1559. Everyone was given a massive fright by the sudden appearance of a young woman in a colorful dress. What's going on? Why is there another person here all of a sudden? Such an adorable and powerful young woman. There was no such person in the kingdom of the 9 states. However, seeing as she was on their side, they all began to cheer along with her. The vermilion bird princess had Su Xiaolan in her left hand and Enlin in her right, and she sprinted through the air as if she had kidnapped 2 people and eloped with them. However, the rage and remorse on her face indicated that she was on the verge of a mental breakdown. What the hell? Why did I jump out to help you? The vermilion bird princess was extremely remorseful. However, Enlin was very elated. This proves that you still don't want me to die. Thank you, Vermilion Bird Princess. I'll be sure to repay you in the future. The Vermilion Bird Princess rolled her eyes. Who cares about your repayment? Su Xiaolan could tell from their conversation that their relationship was not simple, but she also knew that this was not the time to be asking questions, so she refrained from doing so. Xiaolan, let me introduce you. This is a friend I met in the southern Heavenly Wing Nation. Her name is the Vermilion Bird Princess, Unlin introduced. Hello, Vermilion Bird Princess. Thank you for saving us, Su Xiaolan said with a dainty smile. However, she was thinking to herself, Unlin and the Vermilion Bird Princess met in the southern Heavenly Wing Nation, so why didn't he mention her to her when he came back? Unlin continued, her true identity is the 9-colored divine vermilion bird of the southern Heavenly Wing Nation. She's a kind-hearted bird, so she's a very nice person. So you're the 9-colored divine vermilion bird? Su Xiaolan was a little astonished. The 9-colored divine vermilion bird was renowned across the entire continent, not just because of her power, but also because she was the goddess of the bird tribe. Even beings of different tribes would be entranced by the beauty of the 9-colored divine vermilion bird. Her beauty had transcended the boundaries of all species. The Vermilion Bird Princess stuck out her tongue with a sweet smile upon hearing Su Xiaolan's words. I am indeed the 9-colored divine vermilion bird, but almost no living beings have ever seen my human form. You have to keep this a secret for me, Su Xiaolan nodded blankly. She was struggling to reconcile this adorable young woman with the high and mighty 9-colored divine vermilion bird. The sound of an explosion came from behind him. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu had already broken through the phoenix, the celestial larch, black spirit snake, and white spirit snake's defenses, and she was charging toward the Vermilion Bird Princess at a speed faster than any of the Tao integration stage super mighty figures. The Vermilion Bird Princess sped onward with 2 women in her arms, and she gritted her teeth as she looked on at the oncoming Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu. She wanted to abandon Enlin and Su Xiaolan, but she still held on to them tightly. I've really been unlucky for 8 lifetimes. Why did I have to meet someone like you to provoke me? The Vermilion Bird Princess spat as a pair of wings suddenly spread open on her red high heels, and her speed increased explosively once again. She had clearly unleashed a speed mystic technique. Unlin must die. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu shot forth like a black shadow, and no one could keep up with her. The distance between them continued to shrink. Unlin could feel the Vermilion Bird Princess tightening her arms around his waist. She was clearly extremely nervous. This was actually quite normal. The Vermilion Bird Princess had already experienced just how terrifying Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu was. Even the Celestial Larch at the Tao integration pinnacle stage was no match for her. Whoosh! A long spear materialized from a ball of darkness in the distance. The Vermilion Bird Princess instantly sensed an inexorable power. This was the power of karma. The power of darkness had fused together with the curse of karma, and the spear would definitely strike its target before plunging them into eternal darkness. When had this karma connection been established? This was way too terrifying. The Vermilion Bird Princess' heart jolted with shock, and she immediately turned around to conjure up a series of glowing crystal shields. Upon closer inspection, one could see that there were at least 10,000 layers of crystal shields materialized. The black spear crashed into the crystal shields, and it was like a chaotic beast with its gargantuan mouth devouring the crystal shields in a frenzy. One crystal shield after another was quickly melted and engulfed, leaving behind a massive hole. The Vermilion Bird Princess' eyes widened as she unleashed all of her power to unleash a spell technique. However, the power of the black spear had far exceeded her imagination. It was like a divine spear that could pierce through anything, and once it was hurled, its target's fate would be sealed. The Vermilion Bird Princess looked deeply into Enlin's eyes, and there were tears shimmering in her eyes as if to say, I'm even willing to give up my life for you. Unlin was also feeling extremely guilty, and he was just about to say something when he discovered that he had been tossed away by the Vermilion Bird Princess, and Su Xiaolan had also been tossed away. A heroic expression appeared on the Vermilion Bird Princess' face as she quickly flew away from Enlin and Su Xiaolan. The black spear was simply too powerful, and she didn't want Enlin and Su Xiaolan to be by her side in case they were caught in the crossfire. Vermilion Bird Princess. Enlin couldn't help but burst into tears at the sight of the Vermilion Bird Princess' selfless expression, and he yelled in a panicked voice. Scenes from the past began to surface in his mind. The two of them had become friends after their battle at the Sun Tree Arena. He had given the title of Sun Tree War God to the Vermilion Bird Princess, whom he thought had died in battle. He had accidentally reunited with the Vermilion Bird Princess on the 7th level. The Vermilion Bird Princess had created an opportunity for him to meet Ely, and they had gone through thick and thin together in the mythological beast sex 5-colored lightning pit. The Vermilion Bird Princess had always been an honest and considerate person. Even Su Xiaolan couldn't help but feel tears welling up in her eyes. Just from this gesture alone, she felt like the Vermilion Bird Princess was a very good girl. Enlin and Su Xiaolan tumbled to the ground, and the Vermilion Bird Princess flew into the sky. The black spear then began to change directions. It plunged toward the ground. Vermilion Bird Princess. Enlin. Su Xiaolan drew a sharp intake of breath. That's right, the black spear was hurtling toward Enlin. This scene caused everyone to be stunned. They finally understood what was going on. Karma was connected, but it wasn't with the Vermilion Bird Princess. It was with Enlin. The Vermilion Bird Princess came to a sudden realization. She had never interacted with Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu before, so how could she have given the black spear to her? This didn't make any sense. As for Enlin, he was feeling extremely traumatized. He roared with tears streaming down his face. How much do you hate me? I'm asking you, how much do you hate me? All of the mighty figures had joined forces to deal with Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu, but she was still beating up a cripple. Now, the Vermilion Bird Princess was fleeing with him, but Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu was still ignoring the Vermilion Bird Princess and attacking Enlin. What kind of blood feud was this? No one answered Enlin's roar. The only response he received was Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's cold and emotionless expression, as well as the fearsome might of the black spear. Chapter 1560. Enlin knew that he wouldn't be able to evade this time. His energy had been completely depleted, and he couldn't even roll around on the ground. What else could he do to evade this lethal strike? Furthermore, the black spear was imbued with Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's powerful power of karma, so it wouldn't stop until it struck Enlin. It was like the most terrifying homing missile in this world, and no matter how much of an opponent he was, it would still be able to follow him until his A*S exploded. Was there any way for him to defend himself against this attack without using any abilities? In moments of life and death, some people's minds would go completely blank, and they would instantly fall into a daze. However, others would think countless times faster in response to their powerful survival instincts. Vermilion Bird Mirror? No, it had already been shattered. If he tried to defend himself against this attack, the mirror might shatter and he would die. Chaotic Alloy Brick? The most black and hardest under the heavens? A thought flashed through Enlin's mind, and he immediately pulled out the inky black brick before expanding it. At this moment, the black spear had already fallen like a bolt of lightning. Boom! The black spear pierced through the inky black brick in a frenzy. The true will of eternal darkness made the spear of darkness shine even more terrifyingly. It was even sharper than all god artifacts. However, an extremely powerful spear let loose an extremely blood-curdling wail as it pierced through the black brick, as if it had encountered some kind of unsolvable conundrum. Sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. The sound of crackling electricity erupted. The black spear pierced through the brick over and over again. The black brick remained completely unmoved, and its smooth, black surface appeared to be quite plain and simple. The earth caved in violently. And Lin also threw up a mouthful of blood from the immense pressure emanating from the black brick. The internal injuries that he had just recovered from using an immortal pill were instantly shattered again. Boom, boom, boom. The earth caved in again and again, and it cracked open again and again. And Lin had completely lost all feeling in his body, and if it weren't for the fact that he was forcing himself to hold his breath and constantly reminding himself to remain conscious, he would have already fainted. After crashing through the black spear over and over again, a crisp crack finally erupted. The tip of the spear was snapped off right before everyone's astonished eyes, and it flew into the air. The black spear also seemed to lose its support and began to dissipate. Holy F***ck, he blocked it? The vermilion bird princess' eyes widened with shock. After all, this was a dark spear that contained the power of cause and effect. If it didn't hit its target, it would chase after it forever. How could it be bent by an unassuming brick? Lin. Su Xiaolan was sent flying hundreds of meters away by the aftermath of the shock. She looked anxiously at Lin in the distance. I'm fine. Lin put away the chaotic alloy brick and replied loudly, reassuring Su Xiaolan. Will you be fine? A cold and emotionless voice rang out. Lin lay on the ground. He tilted his head and saw the woman who had moved to his side at some point. Hiss! This teleportation, which was like a scene from a horror movie, made him involuntarily suck in a cold breath. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's snowy white, flawless skin was now riddled with black lines, completely ruining her beauty. These black lines were glowing with a peculiar light, and they resonated with the black divine halo above her head. She stared at Lin with her abyssal eyes, and the corners of her lips curled up slightly. She was like a ferocious beast that had finally cornered its prey, and a cruel yet elated smile appeared on her face. Lin silently pulled out the massive black brick from his storage ring again. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu looked down at the trembling Lin, and she snatched the brick away before tossing it several dozen kilometers away with a smile. Lin, how much? Let me ask you, how deep is the hatred? You're not even going to leave me a brick? At least give me a sense of security before I die. It's all over now. This is what you get for not being friends with me. A hint of melancholy appeared on Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's emotionless face. She materialized her black longsword again, and the true intent of eternal darkness began to surge forth. This was a paramount will that reduced everything to darkness. In that instant, Lin was struck by a profound sense of the laws of darkness. Perhaps it was because he was so close to death, but he was struck by a very peculiar feeling, as if the power of darkness before him was traceable. The extreme of nothingness was the state of being. The extreme of being was the state of nothingness. Objects of extreme mass and density could become black holes that engulfed everything. Within the void and chaos of eternal darkness, a universe with boundless mass could also be born, and Lin didn't know why these thoughts were welling up in his heart. In the final second of his life, he wasn't thinking about Xiaolan. Instead, he was thinking about the Big Bang. Am I a stupid C***T? And Lin thought to himself with a grief-stricken expression. Die. As long as you die, you'll be with us forever. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu murmured to herself as she gripped her black longsword with both hands and raised it high above her head. Bam! There was another shattering sound. The divine halo above Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's head exploded. The divine halo, which had been glowing with a divine light a moment ago, exploded into specks of light that disappeared into thin air. The black longsword also crumbled into nothingness. And Lin was dumbstruck. The people who had chased after him had also turned from panic and nervousness into astonishment. All of the black-veined patterns on Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's body receded like a receding tide, revealing her snowy white, delicate body. Her footsteps were light and frail, and she was like a willow twig that was swaying on its own despite the absence of any wind. Her eyes became golden again, but this was an extremely dim golden color, as if they were gems without any luster or luster. They were dull and devoid of any vitality. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu faltered momentarily before looking around with confusion in her eyes. A wry smile appeared on her face as she looked up at the faint red sky, then at the collapsed Lin, upon which a wry smile appeared on her face. So I failed after all, pfff. She couldn't help but throw up a mouthful of black blood. Lin was a little surprised to see this. Wasn't all heavenly human tribe blood pure white? However, that wasn't important anymore. He was very elated at this moment. At the final moment of the battle, Lin Yu was finally unable to hold on. He knew that Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu had to pay an extremely heavy price to unleash her ninth divine halo. The Heavenly Tao would inflict backlash upon the heavenly human tribe, and this backlash would definitely be extremely terrifying. Otherwise, Heavenly God Jordan wouldn't have been forced into such a dire situation. I've won this battle. A triumphant smile appeared on Lin's face as he lay on the ground. Lin Yu was no longer as domineering and vicious as before. She was like a helpless little girl as she looked around before squatting down and picking up a large rock with great difficulty. Lin Yu smiled at Lin before raising the rock and hurling it toward Lin's face. Chapter 1561. Lin was completely dumbstruck. There were only two words in his mind: Holy F***ck. Never would he have thought that Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu would be able to pick up a massive rock from the ground and hurl it toward his face, even though she was completely powerless. How much did she hate him? How much did she hate him? Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu had unleashed all of her power, and her tall and slender body was also falling toward Lin, as if she were trying to transfer all of her weight onto the rock. Lin looked at the rock that was growing larger and larger, and an expression of despair appeared on his face. Could it be that he, the mighty heavenly court war god, who had lived his entire life, was going to die under an ordinary rock instead of the fearsome power of the divine halo? The vermilion bird princess immediately flicked a finger upon seeing this, and a powerful force pierced through space to pulverize the falling rock. However, Lin Yu's body was still hurtled toward Lin due to inertia. Thump! Ow! Lin let loose a pained cry as Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu crashed into his chest. Thus, Lin Yu fell into Lin's arms, and her forehead bumped into Lin's chin. Lin could feel the soft sensation on his body, as well as the warmth emanating from her body. He saw Lin Yu raise her head and stare at him with a pair of dimming eyes. The two of them were inches apart. Lin could clearly see the dust and blood stains on Lin Yu's exquisitely beautiful face. He was in a panic. At such a close distance, Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu was going to do whatever she wanted to him. However, he didn't have the strength to resist in his current state. Lin Yu's cherry lips parted slightly, and Lin could even detect a faint fragrance wafting from her lips. A soft and melancholy voice sounded. When you stare into the abyss ignores you. Lin Yu looked at Lin and pressed her hands against his chest as she spoke in a gentle voice. Lin's lips twitched slightly. What was that supposed to mean? Why was it different from what he had imagined? Was Lin Yu crazy? Lin Yu smiled gently and asked, Lin, are you willing to be friends with me? Lin was dumbstruck once again. What was the point of asking this question now? However, when he thought about how he was currently being pressed down by Lin Yu and was completely powerless, he absolutely couldn't anger her. Thus, he nodded slightly and said, I'm willing. Hearing this, Lin Yu was stunned. Her dim eyes suddenly became misty and she sobbed softly, That's great, we're still friends in the end. I wanted to kill you and then follow you. I didn't expect that we would still be alive and become friends. Lin Yu raised her flawless, jade-like face and smiled. In the dusk, her smile was especially bright. Lin, I await you in death and eternal darkness. Her voice was like a gentle breeze. Lin fell into a daze at the sight of this dazzling smile. He then felt the weight weighing down on his body slowly lighten. The woman before him gradually transformed into specks of white light before disappearing between heaven and earth. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu was no longer between heaven and earth. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu was dead. No one doubted this. Regardless of whether it was the celestial larch, white spirit snake, black spirit snake, or the phoenix, or even Su Xiaolan and Xianyuan Qing, all of them heaved heavy sighs of relief. And Lin lay silently on the ground with a confused expression on his face. There was something wrong with Lin Yu's words before she died. It felt weird. Await me in death and eternal darkness? Was she cursing me to die? And Lin's heart was filled with confusion, but he didn't know who to ask. Lin. The vermilion bird princess descended from the sky and cradled Lin in her arms. Are you all right? Lin heaved a forlorn sigh. Aside from the fact that my energy is completely depleted, my bones and muscles are all broken, and my consciousness almost left my body, I'm fine. The Vermilion Bird Princess. The Vermilion Bird Princess fed an immortal pill to Lin with a pained expression before carrying Lin over to Su Xiaolan and cradling the immobile Su Xiaolan in her arms as well. I feel like it's a little troublesome to carry him like this. The Vermilion Bird Princess had Xiaolan in her left arm and Lin in her right, and she looked as if she had reached the pinnacle of her life, but there was a resigned expression on her face. She looked around at the battlefield and discovered a red blood soul jade coffin in the distance, upon which her eyes lit up. Boom boom. Lin and Su Xiaolan were tossed into the coffin at the same time. The lid of the coffin was then slammed back down. The Vermilion Bird Princess used a spell technique to glue the lid of the coffin back together before dusting off her hands with a smile. The Blood Soul Jade coffin has regenerative properties and can also protect you. It's just that the coffin lid has been sliced in half, so I've used a spell technique to patch it up. Lin and Su Xiaolan stared speechlessly at the smug Vermilion Bird Princess. The Vermilion Bird Princess clapped her hands together before carrying the coffin on her back. I'll protect you this time. Lin thought back to when he was carrying Xiaolan around in the coffin. Now, it was the Vermilion Bird Princess who was carrying him and Xiaolan around in the coffin. This strange development made him feel like life was a wonderful place. If he had been the slightest bit careless, he would have ended up in the same coffin as his wife. Lin and Su Xiaolan squeezed into the same coffin, feeling each other's body heat. They looked into each other's eyes, and both of them couldn't help but burst into laughter. It feels a little weird. Su Xiaolan's eyes crinkled into crescents as a warm smile appeared on her face. Lin was also quite amused. We weren't born on the same day, month, and year, but we're going to die on the same day, month, and year. That way, we'll be going down to the grave together. Su Xiaolan patted Lin's chest with a displeased expression. Don't say that. We still have countless years to live. Lin couldn't help but plant a light peck on the tip of her nose as he looked at the enraged beauty. Can't you behave yourself in a coffin? A faint blush appeared on Su Xiaolan's face, and she was extremely shy. The domineering aura of the divine phoenix maiden was nowhere to be seen. Lin chuckled as a sense of bliss welled up in his heart. There was a familiar person beside him, a familiar fragrance, and a familiar warmth. After surviving that ordeal, he would cherish the warmth around him even more. However, the Vermilion Bird Princess was quite displeased. Say, can you two patients stop flirting with each other? Can you at least consider my feelings? I finally understand why Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu hates you so much. Su Xiaolan was feeling a little awkward. However, Lin didn't seem to mind in the slightest. On the other side of the battlefield, the Celestial Larch, Black Spirit Snake, and White Spirit Snake were all trying to stop Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu with all their might. Heavenly God Jordan was able to catch his breath and quickly recover from his injuries. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's sacrifice created a very good opportunity for Heavenly God Jordan to retaliate. He basked in a green divine light and looked down at the vast earth below. Lin Yu, let me avenge you. Chapter 1562. Heavenly Goddess Lin, you had already perished. The celestial Dharch, black spirit snake, white spirit snake, and the phoenix all had their attention focused on Heavenly God Jordan. They could see that Heavenly God Jordan was taking this opportunity to recover his power, and one earth-shattering spell technique after another fell from the sky, each of which was imbued with the power to destroy heaven and earth. Jordan's pure golden eyes gradually turned black. Everyone's hearts jolted upon seeing this. They knew that he was about to unleash his 9th divine halo. Just how terrifying was a heavenly god with 9 divine halos? That battle between Lin and Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu was a perfect example of that. Even with the powers of the heavenly gods, they would still find it very difficult to resist. It could be said that if they didn't handle this properly, they could all be wiped out. We can't let him unleash the power of his divine halo. Hurry up and stop him with everything we have. The celestial Dharch and black spirit snake yelled in unison. Heavenly God Jordan remained expressionless as he spoke in an indifferent voice. The 9th black divine halo is known as the fallen heavenly god. It's not that the divine halo will lead the heavenly god to fall, but rather that the heavenly god is unable to withstand this power and will fall as a result. The black barrier created an absolute defense that kept the combined attacks of the celestial Dharch and the others at bay. Jordan raised his inky black abyssal eyes. How ironic! The black divine halo is a power that we are supposed to possess, but it's being restricted by this world. Countless terrifying spell techniques exploded outside the barrier. The barrier, which was imbued with the power of the laws of the heavenly Tao, was beginning to crack open. Heaven-crushing techniques had a special suppressive effect against heavenly gods. However, it was still too slow. A black divine halo was already gradually materializing above Heavenly God Jordan's head. The celestial Dharch and the others knew that things were not looking good, but there was nothing they could do. Right at this moment, the earth around Heavenly God Jordan suddenly bulged, and an earthy humanoid living being suddenly emerged before shattering the divine halo above Heavenly God Jordan's head with a single slap. Bam! The black divine halo disintegrated into countless particles of light before it had even fully materialized. Heavenly God Jordan's eyes turned golden again, and he stared at the living being that had suddenly appeared before him with astonishment on his face. The earthen yellow creature had a distinct face, as if it had been carved by a knife. He was completely naked and had no gender. There were coarse lines on his skin, which were simple yet contained the great Tao. Anyone who looked at him would be mesmerized. There was also a sense of vicissitude. Most importantly, there was an earthen yellow divine ring above its head. It constantly revolved and emitted a unique aura, as if it was the only sovereign in the world. Jordan, you've done enough. There's no need to sacrifice yourself anymore. The living being's voice was extremely powerful, and every single word seemed to strike at Jordan's heart. Heavenly God Jordan looked at the living being before him, and he was initially astonished beyond words before a respectful expression appeared on his face. As you wish, Heavenly Mountain God. Heavenly Mountain God? The celestial Dharch and the others, as well as Lin and Su Xiaolan lying in their coffins, were all given a fright. The Heavenly Mountain God, the embodiment of the heavenly Tao. Heavenly gods that didn't have ordinary names and were named after unique elements were all representatives of the heavenly Tao. They represented the paramount powers of the heavenly Tao, and each and every one of them possessed unimaginable power. The vermilion bird princess body trembled with fear, and she almost abandoned the coffin and ran away. Holy Mother of God, I don't want to offend the heavens. I still want to live for another 500 million years. We're already on the same boat, so don't think too much and face reality. Lin offered words of consolation. Boom! The barrier that Heavenly God Jordan had set up exploded. Countless spell techniques rained down upon Heavenly God Jordan and the Heavenly Mountain God. The Heavenly Mountain God materialized a mundane-looking wooden staff out of thin air before knocking it against the ground. An earthen yellow film of light instantly enshrouded the two of them. In that instant, everyone felt as if they were looking at a divine mountain with no end in sight, and they were struck by an instinctive sense of how insignificant they were. Boom, boom, boom. Spell techniques exploded, and destructive power erupted forth. After the energy dissipated, everyone was greeted by the sight of Heavenly God Jordan and the Heavenly Mountain God standing on the ground, completely unscathed. The earthen yellow film of light was still glowing with a boundless divine light. One had to realize that this was an attack unleashed by three super mighty figures at the Tao integration pinnacle stage. They couldn't even break through their barrier. The Heavenly Mountain God was not smug. Instead, it turned toward the vermilion bird princess and shook its head with a forlorn expression. It's a pity about Lin Yu. I had thought that she would be able to kill Lin with her 8 divine halos, but who would have thought that she would still fall short even after using her 9 divine halos? It heaved a forlorn sigh as it spoke. This was an unintentional remark, but it was like a bolt from the blue to everyone else. It had immediately expressed its disappointment that Lin had not been killed. From this, one could imagine just how important Lin was to the Heavenly Mountain God. Lin almost jumped out of his coffin upon hearing this. He wanted to ask the Heavenly Mountain God what kind of vendetta it had against him. What kind of vendetta did it have against him? For a split second, he felt like he was the main character. He was lying in a coffin, but there was still a boss that wanted to kill him. What the hell was going on? I won't let you hurt Lin. The celestial Thearcha's expression was filled with determination. Lin was extremely touched. The celestial Tharch was actively drawing enemies to him. If you want to hurt Senior Lin, then you'll have to do it over my dead body. White Spirit Snake's battle intent was already surging, and she refused to back down in the slightest. Lin wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes. Was White Spirit Snake being so nice to him? Black Spirit Snake hesitated momentarily before speaking in a cold voice. If you want to step over Little Bai's dead body, then you'll have to do it over mine first. That was a very subtle way of putting it. The phoenix also refused to back down, and it let loose an enraged cry. Chirp, chirp, chirp. Everyone chose to stand on the same side as Lin, and they were going to fight with their lives on the line. Lin was extremely touched by this, and he wanted nothing more than to jump out of his coffin and fight alongside his friends. The Heavenly Mountain God shook its head slowly. No, I'm not the one who's going to kill Lin, so why are you all standing in my way? As soon as these words were spoken, everyone's expressions turned cold. The vermilion bird princess seemed to have detected something, and she immediately spread open her wings with her red high heels on her back before flying into the distance at her maximum speed. The ground in front of her suddenly exploded. A tall and slender woman with a head of sharp black hair and a black divine halo above her head suddenly appeared. She chuckled lightly, and her body glowed with a black metallic sheen as a dangerous light flashed in her crimson eyes. You're already at the southern heavenly gate and you still want to leave? I'm waiting for you to become useless, Lin. You can all pay for what you did to Lin Yu with your lives. A supreme aura that contained an unparalleled will suddenly spread out. The vermilion bird princess was given a massive fright. Lin was astonished. Another enemy with the power of the heavenly gods. Chapter 1563. The woman's entire body was completely black, and her white teeth were revealed when she smiled, creating quite a harrowing sight to behold. Allow me to introduce myself. I am the Heavenly Metal God, the God that is going to take your life. Lin, no matter how powerful you are or how many trump cards you have, you won't be able to do anything in your current state. The Heavenly Metal God wore a calm and confident smile on her face. Everyone finally understood why the two heavenly gods had taken so long to enter the battlefield. They were also wary of Lin, and were afraid that Lin would target them if they entered the battlefield too early. Lin had already been listed as an extremely dangerous being in the eyes of the representatives of the heavenly Tao. They didn't know whether this was a good thing or a bad thing. Logically speaking, the fact that he was being taken seriously by the enemies meant that he was extremely powerful, so they should be happy. However, Enlil was not happy. The representatives of the heavenly Tao were taking him so seriously, so how was he going to play the fool and catch them off guard in the future? The enemies were going to send him the most powerful cannons and the most ferocious chicks. How was he going to win? Enlil suddenly felt like life was so difficult. Everything had already been arranged by the enemies. Heavenly Goddess Linyu and Heavenly God Jordan were already enough to force them into a corner. Now that Enlil and Su Xiaolan were completely disabled, how were they supposed to fight the Heavenly Mountain God and Heavenly Metal God? They might not be able to win even if they were to give up their lives. The Heavenly Metal God paid no heed to Enlil's complex emotions as she rushed toward the Vermilion Bird Princess. She gripped the air with one hand, upon which a golden sword made of an indistinguishable material appeared in her hand. A representative of the Heavenly Tao was extremely powerful, and even though the Vermilion Bird Princess had focused all of her attention on the Heavenly Metal God, she was still unable to keep up with her speed. Whoosh! A sword projection flashed. The Vermilion Bird Princess evaded with extreme speed, but her waist was still struck. Her dress was sliced open, and blood gushed forth from her slender waist. She gritted her teeth, and her red high heels stomped the ground, leaving a red streak of light in her wake. There were still a few crimson butterflies fluttering in her wake to disrupt her enemy's movements. Space interference and illusion? A joyful smile appeared on the Heavenly Metal God's face as she quickly caught up to the fleeing Vermilion Bird Princess. She slashed the golden sword in her right hand through the air, eliminating all obstacles in her way. At the same time, a white metal whip instantly condensed in her left hand. Like a lightning snake, it pierced towards the coffin on her back. Bang! There was an earth-shattering explosion. The lid of the coffin, which was made of celestial artifact material, was broken again, and a hole was pierced by the tip of the metal whip. Enlil looked at the tip of the metal whip that was only a few centimeters away from his head, and had almost pierced through it. He could not help but break into a cold sweat. "All right, that's enough playing around. Let's end this as soon as possible," the Heavenly Mountain God said in an indifferent voice. "All right." An elated smile appeared on the Heavenly Metal God's face, and the metal whip in her hand wriggled like a spirit snake again as she tried to widen the hole in the coffin before stabbing Enlil to death. Enlil looked at the tip of the metal whip that kept twisting in front of him. He couldn't help but shout, "Help! Even the heavenly gods have come out. How long are you guys going to hide?" Rumble! Lightning pierced through heaven and earth, and an earth-shattering boom erupted. After the blinding lightning dissipated, 3 figures appeared in the sky. A crimson bolt of lightning crashed down toward the Heavenly Metal God at an incredible speed. The Heavenly Metal God immediately retreated before unleashing a sword strike at the same time. Bam! A violent collision ensued, accompanied by extremely dazzling energy. Enlil caught sight of a valiant figure, as if he were a peerless hero who had descended from the heavens. Her evil dragon emperor robe danced in the wind, and her hand transformed into a black dragon claw that clamped down on the Heavenly Metal God's golden sword. Her 5 claws transformed into a dragon, and the roar of a true dragon suddenly erupted, making even the heavens tremor. The dragon's roar was imbued with extremely terrifying heaven-crushing intent, and it instantly reduced the ground within a radius of 5 kilometers to dust. The Heavenly Metal God reacted extremely quickly, and she instantly materialized a white metal bracelet to keep the dragon's roar at bay. A shockwave swept past, but the metal bracelet was still cracked open. The 4th heavenly disciple of the heaven-crushing sect, the ancient Dragon Empress. The Heavenly Metal God's expression shifted. The ancient Dragon Empress was vastly renowned across the entire Tai Chu continent. After all, she had slain the Heavenly Speed God in person, so normal heavenly gods didn't dare to get complacent in her presence. Enlil heaved a long sigh of relief upon seeing the ancient Dragon Empress. He had been hiding his trump card all this time in order to deal with these heavenly gods. The ancient dragon empress was a woman of few words. She didn't say anything, and her other hand passed through the heavenly metal god's sword before grabbing toward the heavenly metal god's face. The heavenly metal god immediately retreated upon seeing this, and she swung her metal whip through the air in an extremely agile manner before stabbing it toward the ancient dragon empress back. The ancient dragon empress continued onward, and a dark yellow divine Tao light erupted from her body. A massive millstone enshrouded her tall and slender body, and it rotated relentlessly, pulverizing all things, as if even the sky were going to be pulverized at this moment. Heaven-crushing millstone. The metal whip struck the millstone and was instantly pulverized hundreds of thousands of times, and even the tip of the whip had been ground flat. As expected of the ancient dragon empress, a joyful smile appeared on the heavenly metal god's face. The ancient dragon empress was not happy at all at the sight of the heavenly metal god's elated smile. Instead, tears of blood began to flow from her eyes. Anlin suddenly became excited. Back then, he and Su Xiaolan had been traumatized by the ancient dragon empress tear-shedding technique. Even a return to void final stage mighty figure would self-detonate in less than a second after being struck by that technique. The ancient dragon empress was now at the Tao integration stage, and she was the fourth heavenly disciple of the heaven-crushing sect. Even Anlin didn't dare to imagine just how terrifying her tears of blood were. Heaven-crushing slaughter. The woman let loose a clear cry, and a peculiar red power of the divine Tao instantly enshrouded the entire space. The heavenly metal god was struck by an extremely powerful sense of peril in that instant. A sense of slaughter and destruction that reached straight to the very essence of the ancient dragon empress was ravaged by a frenzy of destruction. Even though her body was made up of the most resolute metal, it was still able to disintegrate particles. She let loose a cry of surprise as over 100 golden swords imbued with absolute sharpness materialized before her, which she used to stab toward the ancient dragon empress. However, the ancient dragon empress charged straight into the sword formation like a fearless warrior before unleashing a fist toward the heavenly metal god's face. In a battle between powerful beings, a split second was all that mattered. As expected of a super mighty figure who was most proficient in slaughter, the ancient dragon empress was only able to create opportunities by not fearing death. She managed to land her fist on the heavenly metal god's face before the heavenly metal god had a chance to activate her sword formation. The heavenly metal god's face was completely deformed by her fist. Boom! An earth-shattering boom erupted. The heavenly metal god, who had just been laughing heartily in battle, was knocked flying for over 50 kilometers by the ancient dragon empress. Chapter 1564. Heavenly God Jordan was astonished to see the heavenly metal god being knocked flying by a single punch. The celestial Dharch, black spirit snake, and the others also clicked their tongues upon seeing this. This ancient dragon empress was no ordinary badass. Only the heavenly disciples of the heaven-crushing sect were capable of bashing the most revered heavenly gods in such an unreasonable manner. The heavenly mountain god raised an eyebrow as it turned toward another direction. A handsome young man in a coarse linen robe made his way over to it with his bare feet. Every step he took made contact with the ground, but not a speck of dust could be seen. It was as if he was in the mortal world, yet he had left it and reached a higher dimension. The second heavenly disciple of the heaven-crushing sect, Chen Chen? Jordan's expression shifted again. He was astonished by the ancient dragon empress' appearance. However, Chen Chen's appearance was nothing short of astonishing. The heavenly time god was the most powerful heavenly god below the 6 paramount heavenly gods. However, it had fallen 100 years ago, and its power had reverted to the unconscious heavenly Tao. Heavenly God Jordan knew that the heavenly time god had fallen not because of Anlin, but because of the second heavenly disciple of the heaven-crushing sect, Chen Chen. Chen Chen was the one who had forced it to self-detonate. The heavenly gods were very cautious and didn't want to reveal themselves as they were wary of the heavenly disciples of the heaven-crushing sect. Now, the second heavenly disciple of the heaven-crushing sect really had appeared here, and he seemed to be waiting for them to show themselves. Are you finally going to attack? What a surprise! The heavenly mountain god stared coldly at the oncoming youth, and the might of the divine halo above its head soared explosively as boundless might crashed down upon it like a mountain. Chun continued onward as if he didn't exist. Looks like the heavenly gods are very nervous. The void body mantra really is a good thing. Even the heavenly gods are unable to detect its presence. A smile appeared on the celestial Thearcha's face as he looked at the approaching Chun. Chun-Chen's void body mantra could even isolate the power of the heavenly time god's self-detonation. It wasn't all that surprising that he had managed to fool these two heavenly gods. The final trump card of the extermination team had finally made all of the heavenly gods quite nervous. The crushing situation, which was originally within their grasp, was reversed once again. Heavenly God Jordan, the heavenly mountain god, and the heavenly metal god discovered that they were the ones being hunted. The extermination team's final trump card had arrived. The celestial Tharch was overjoyed. However, Black Spirit Snake and White Spirit Snake were given a fright before their eyes blazed with rage. Black Spirit Snake turned toward the celestial Tharch with shock and rage. Why are the heaven-crushing sect members here? You know about the Sky Emperor, right? You're the second in command of the heaven-mending sect, yet you're cooperating with the heaven-crushing sect's heavenly disciple? The celestial Tharch blinked with an innocent expression. No, I didn't. Don't spout nonsense. I'm working with the sect leader of the 4-9 Immortal sect, Unlin. However, Chun of the heaven-crushing sect just so happened to be working with Unlin. We just happened to be together. Black Spirit Snake almost threw up a mouthful of blood upon hearing the celestial Thearcha's explanation. What if King happened to be together? Was he trying to fool an idiot? White Spirit Snake nodded with an enlightened expression. No wonder Her Majesty told us not to do anything rash and to prioritize destroying the heavenly human tribe first when we reported the southern heavenly gate to Her Majesty. She's afraid that we'll fight the heaven-crushing sect? The heavenly mountain god's aura became more and more terrifying, as if it were a boundless Mount Bujo that had been born from the chaos of the universe. It crashed down toward Chun with boundless mountainous power. Ordinary almighties would be crushed into a puddle of blood the moment they came into contact with this pressure. They wouldn't even have the chance to resist. However, Chun only patted his shoulder as if he had dusted it off before continuing to make his way toward the heavenly mountain god with a smile on his face. In reality, his battle with the heavenly mountain god had already commenced. Elsewhere on the battlefield, the heavenly metal god stood up and withdrew all of her previous condescension. There was still a deep fist imprint on her cheek, and her face was completely devoid of any elasticity, creating a very peculiar sight to behold. However, she didn't mind. She gripped the air with one hand as she looked at the oncoming ancient dragon empress. Countless golden pieces of metal spun rapidly through the air like saw-teeth. Not only were they extremely hard, but they were also imbued with the power to slice through all things. The ancient dragon empress fist crashed into the golden pieces of metal, and the countless pieces of metal were able to withstand her devastating attack. Not only that, but they were also able to inflict a series of extremely deep gashes on the ancient dragon empress fist. The ancient dragon empress eyelids twitched, and she quickly retreated. This is chaotic immortal metal, the sharpest metal in the universe. There's no way you can shatter it. The heavenly metal god finally regained some of her confidence. She stood proudly amid the countless pieces of chaotic immortal metal. In this world, I can use any type of metal, and I can unleash its properties to the fullest extent. I am the goddess of all metals. The ancient dragon empress remained silent, and she shook her throbbing hand before pouncing toward the heavenly metal god again. The vermilion bird princess heaved a sigh of relief upon seeing that the three heavenly gods had all been held back. At this time, there was another wave of extremely beautiful fragrance that refreshed the mind. She raised her head to discover an extremely beautiful woman descending from the sky. She had a pair of clear blue eyes, a sharp nose and thin yet extremely beautiful lips. Her features were like the most perfect artwork. What was most eye-catching were her 6 pristine, flawless wings, which glowed with a holy and healing light as they spread open. There were also countless white feathers falling from the sky, creating a beautiful, holy, and alluring spectacle. Raphaela, the vermilion bird princess, immediately identified the newcomer. Raphaela was one of the 4 archangels of the Garden of Eden. She was the #1 superstar on the Tai-Chu continent who had attracted countless fans through her beauty alone. Furthermore, she possessed Tao integration stage power and an extremely healing smile, so she was revered as the #1 goddess on the Tai-Chu continent by many living beings. "I'm here to treat Enlin and Su Xiaolan," Raphaela said with a gentle smile. Enlin was indescribably excited at the sight of Raphaela. Raphaela fulfilled all of his fantasies about angels. She was beautiful, gentle, and could even heal people in times of need. Raphaela carefully carried Enlin and Su Xiaolan out of the cave with an extremely beautiful and comforting smile on her face. "Thank you for your hard work in that battle. Even I couldn't help but cheer for you when I was watching from afar." Enlin was very pleased to hear this. "Look at those words. What a sweet mouth. Your performance has even exceeded the expectations of the 2 heavenly disciples, and it's exactly because of your astonishing power that our plan was able to be executed to perfection." Raphaela continued to praise them with genuine emotions on her beautiful face. Her eyes were fixed on Enlin's body with reverence and a hint of curiosity. Enlin was feeling a little smug after being praised and even worshipped by the #1 goddess of the Tai-Chu continent. Su Xiaolan silently pinched Enlin's waist. Enlin immediately looked straight ahead. Chapter 1565. A smile appeared on Raphaela's face as she looked on with amusement. However, she also turned her attention away from Enlin and focused on setting up a regenerative spell formation. The regenerative spell formation was activated. An enormous amount of healing power flowed into Enlin and Su Xiaolan's bodies. Enlin could feel a very warm power slowly flowing into his body from the surface of his skin. It was as soft and supple as a spring breeze, but it was also filled with boundless vitality. It was like a lover's hand gently caressing his entire body. Regardless of whether it was his injured organs, broken meridians, broken bones, or even his feeble consciousness, all of them were being nurtured and healed. Enlin was even moaning in comfort. All of his exhaustion and pain had disappeared, and his entire body was relaxed and limp. He really wanted to take a good nap. He had tried using immortal tools, immortal pills, and all types of healing spell techniques to heal his injuries, but none of them were as comfortable as they were right now. Furthermore, this was the fastest healing spell technique he had ever used. Even the evergreen technique seemed to resonate with this healing power, thereby significantly enhancing its power. Is this the power of the healing divine Tao? It's so powerful. A blush appeared on Su Xiaolan's face as an expression of enjoyment appeared on her face. She felt as if the after effects of overexerting her body from using the buff mystic technique were greatly alleviated. Cultivators who specialized in healing were extremely rare. There were only a handful of cultivators who had attained the power of the divine Tao through healing in the entire Tai-Chu continent. Furthermore, Archangel Raphaela was the only cultivator on the entire Tai-Chu continent who had successfully attained the Tao integration stage through healing and resonated with heaven and earth. Enlin and Su Xiaolan were currently being treated by the best doctors on the entire Tai-Chu continent. Was it very painful to be hospitalized and receive treatment? Raphaela was going to show them what enjoyment was. Lin looked at the beautiful woman standing at the edge of the spell formation with her eyes tightly closed and her 6 wings spread open. A cool breeze suddenly blew past, revealing a pair of slender and well-proportioned snow-white legs under the angel robe. Her golden hair stirred up the brilliance of the setting sun. She stood alone in the world just like that, tranquil and elegant while divine radiance curled up in spirals. She was beautiful to the point she was like a painting, too pleasing to the eyes. She was super beautiful, the treatment was superb, and the process was especially comfortable. For a split second, Lin was even struck by the urge to slash himself with his sword before asking Archangel Raphaela for help in healing him. He was shocked. Why did this idea feel so familiar? That's right. Didn't Dongfang Zhuangshi use this exact method to get in touch with Dongfang Mengjie? It was just that he was mentally happy, while Lin was physically comfortable. Soon, Lin felt that his body could move, and he could even use a portion of his power. One had to realize that his body had been completely emptied by heavenly goddess Lin Yu, as expected of the top healer on the Tai Chu continent. Raphael opened her bright, sapphire eyes to find Lin and Su Xiaolan meditating off to the side. A faint smile appeared on her face, and it was very comforting and warm. A smile could make one feel very relaxed and elated. In particular, this smile was displayed by Raphaela, who could even perform the Tao integration stage with her healing divine Tao. As such, the power of this smile had been amplified countless times. Even Su Xiaolan's heart was throbbing with excitement, let alone Lin. She had never seen such a beautiful smile in her entire life. Raphael was genuinely happy. If Su Xiaolan and Lin could quickly recover from their injuries and return to battle, then their chances of securing victory would increase significantly. She paused for a moment and decided to change her treatment strategy. All of a sudden, a shadow appeared behind her. The heavenly Tao was invisible, and everything in this world was the heavens. Chaos and nothingness were the heavens, and the Tao encompassed everything. The earth was boundless, and any point on it could be a place where the heavens could descend. An extremely terrifying sense of peril welled up in Raphael's heart. As the #1 healer on the Tai Chu continent, she was very familiar with death. It could be said that she had battled with death all this time. At this critical moment, she naturally knew how close she was to death. Run. She had to run. The sense of peril behind her sent chills running down her spine. She was just about to run toward Lin when a sharp pain suddenly shot through her neck. An extremely sharp object sliced through her neck at an incredible speed, piercing through her tender skin, piercing through her scorching flesh, and piercing through her indestructible bones. Raphael was greeted by the sight of a beautiful body falling feebly toward the ground. Its 6 wings were folded, and its feathers were stained red with blood, creating a particularly sinister sight in the crimson sky. More importantly, the body was headless. Huh! A hoarse voice escaped from her throat as her blue eyes widened. Her hair seemed to have been grabbed and suspended in midair. Her extremely powerful life force allowed her to retain her consciousness even at this moment. Raphael seemed to have realized something, especially when she saw the shock, horror, and rage on the faces of the 2 people before her. She had been killed. When she decided to participate in this battle, she knew that there were bound to be casualties. After all, this was a battle against the entire heavenly human tribe on the southern front. This was the most intense battle in the past few decades, and it was extremely normal for Tao integration stage super mighty figures to fall. However, she didn't think that she would be the first super mighty figure to fall. She was a logistician who was responsible for healing the wounded. Lin's eyes widened, and his mind went completely blank. Everything that was unfolding before his eyes was a massive blow to his heart. Behind Raphael stood a semi-transparent, dark yellow humanoid creature with a black cloak draped over its body. It held a twisted crimson blade in one hand, and it held Raphael's head in the air with its other hand. Raphael's face was filled with astonishment and confusion, and blood continued to flow from the wound on her head. Drip, drip, drip. Just a moment ago, she had been talking and laughing with a warm smile on her face. Now, her expression had completely congealed, and her eyes had lost their liveliness, as if she were a tattered doll. The dark yellow humanoid creature held Raphael's head in its hand with a wide grin on its face, as if it were holding a very valuable trophy. The crimson sky resonated with the blood flowing from the woman's head, as if it were a symphony of despair. And Lin caught sight of the divine halo above the humanoid creature's head, which was a faint greenish-yellow divine halo that was extremely intimidating. Raphael turned to look at Lin and Su Xiaolan, who had risen to their feet in rage. However, the crimson sky gradually engulfed their bodies. Her vision was filled with a vast expanse of red before falling into eternal darkness, upon which she completely lost consciousness. Chapter 1566. Heaven and earth began to wail with grief. The crimson sky became clear and bright, as if it had been healed. It was already evening, and the night sky was slowly descending with countless stars twinkling in the night sky. Heaven and earth were vast and bleak, and only starlight accompanied them. A sense of grief welled up in the hearts of everyone on the battlefield. This was an instinctive sense of grief evoked by the passing of one's Tao. Heaven and earth mourned the death of a Tao integration stage super mighty figure. Countless specks of white light fell upon the earth, shimmering with a gentle light, as if the stars were falling from the sky. The specks of light were imbued with extremely potent healing power, and all of the living beings present could feel their injuries quickly recovering. Even the grief of heaven and earth caused by the death of a Tao integration stage super mighty figure was diluted by this power. This was Raphaela's final reward, and it was just as gentle and healing as ever. In other words, this was the scene of the death of a super mighty figure that was the least saddening to all living beings. And Lin could even see a beautiful and gentle big sister in the sky, cheering him on from afar with a warm smile on her face. Even though the big sister was about to leave him forever, the beauty of this moment struck him with an incomparable sense of warmth and serenity. And Lin and Su Xiaolan had been severely wounded to begin with, so they received the greatest reward. Not only were their injuries quickly recovering, but even their energy was gradually being replenished. Raphaela is dead? Chen Chen's expressionless face faltered for the first time, and he turned toward Raphaela with shock and pity in his eyes. An enraged roar suddenly erupted into the heavens. A red streak of light pierced through the sky before crashing toward the god behind Raphaela at an extremely terrifying speed. "I'm going to kill you, be **starred. The woman's eyes were crimson, and her killing intent soared into the heavens as the roar of a true dragon instantly shattered the ground within a radius of tens of thousands of meters. Borrowing the speed of falling and tearing through the sky, she lifted her leg and kicked at the deity. The kick was imbued with peerless power, as if it could shatter the heavens with a single stomp. Foot of the heavenly Tao. Bam! The collision of red energy instantly reduced everything within a radius of over 50 kilometers to dust. The ancient dragon empress had unleashed her wrath upon this kick, and its heaven-crushing power was elevated to its very peak. Even the heavenly mountain god and the heavenly metal god were struck by a sense of horror. And Lin and Su Xiaolan were knocked back by the shockwave. If it weren't for the fact that they had recovered from some of their injuries, they would have most likely been reduced to ashes by the shockwaves from the ancient dragon empress battle. The ancient voice seemed to pierce through time and space to reach the hearts of everyone present. Anger can make a living being stronger. This saying is indeed true. The energy dissipated. The black-cloaked humanoid creature's cloak was torn away by a terrifying force, revealing his true appearance. It was a face carved out of jade, a handsome young man's face, and his entire body was in a translucent state, as if his body was made of yellow amber. He held Raphaela's head in one hand and the twisted crimson blade in the other as he positioned himself firmly in front of the ancient dragon empress' descending kick. Everyone couldn't help but draw a sharp intake of breath upon seeing this. The ancient dragon empress had unleashed the most powerful heaven-crushing techniques and unleashed her wrath attack, but it wasn't even able to force her opponent back? You can crush stars and shatter moons with a single stomp, but do you think you can move even a single inch of this boundless earth? The yellow god smiled. The ancient dragon empress didn't say anything, but tears of blood suddenly flowed from her eyes. A red divine Tao instantly enshrouded her opponent in an attempt to crush every single part of her opponent's body. However, the yellow god wasn't panicked in the slightest. Instead, it shook its head lightly, as if it was mocking the ancient dragon empress for overestimating herself. Right at this moment, the ancient dragon empress swept a hand through the air. A crimson light flashed past. Her golden hair was sliced cleanly down the middle. Raphaela's head and body were instantly cradled in the ancient dragon empress' arms before she quickly retreated. A faint smile appeared on the yellow god's face. "You're about to die, and you still want to protect your comrade's body? You have such an unyielding personality, but I didn't think you'd have such a soft heart." His feet weren't moving, but his body was chasing after the ancient dragon empress at an extremely terrifying speed. The twisted crimson blade in his hand became even more sinister. Right at this moment, a bolt of golden void lightning imbued with the power to annihilate all things tore through space. The lightning was imbued with a paramount will, as if it were a god that wielded the power of billions of bolts of lightning, and it was determined to annihilate all things in this world. Boom! Divine lightning exploded, annihilating all things. The young man's body faltered as he slashed his blade toward the golden void lightning. The boundless lightning crashed into the crimson blade, only to be sliced in half. "If I had known this would happen, I would have killed that woman sooner. Now there's one more problem to deal with." The young man waved his crimson blade as he looked at Enlin with an indifferent expression. Enlin's expression darkened. He had unleashed the full power of his heavenly lightning power, but it had been so easily blocked by his opponent. This disparity in power struck him with a sense of unease. Thankfully, Enlin wasn't fighting alone. He still had Xiaolan, and the ancient dragon empress had also recovered Raphaela's body before glaring at the divine being with an enraged expression. "Who are you?" Enlin asked the question that had been bothering him the most. A harmless smile appeared on the young man's face as he stared at Enlin with his earthy eyes. "Me? Heaven and earth are black and yellow, and the universe is chaotic and chaotic. There was heaven first, then earth. I am number 2. The young man raised his hands high into the air as he spoke. In that instant, everything between heaven and earth seemed to be resonating with him. Boom, boom, boom. The boundless earth began to tremor violently. It was impossible to describe what kind of power this was. It was as if the entire Tai Chu continent was trembling at his command. The earth cracked open, mountains rose up, vast plains appeared, hills and valleys appeared one after another, a great power that could change the appearance of the continent with just a wave of a hand was appearing before their eyes. They were astonished to the core. That's right. Everything that was happening before their eyes had far exceeded everyone's imagination. Enlin had only seen something like this in the divine mirror world when Tina created the world. The young man slowly lowered his hands, and the earth-shattering transformation came to an abrupt halt as everything returned to normal. However, the earth that had been ravaged by the battle had now been restored to its original state, as if the battle had never taken place. Almost everyone present knew the identity of the deity in front of them. As long as they weren't idiots, they would be able to guess who he was. "I am the culmination of the 5 elements, the all-encompassing earth." The young man's voice was ancient and boundless, and he looked at Enlin and the others with a benevolent expression on his face. "And all of you are my descendants." All of the living beings present exploded upon hearing this. The enemy was telling them, "I'm your father," and asking them if they knew how to explode? Chapter 1567. Of course, everyone couldn't help but draw a sharp intake of breath. The enemy before them was even more terrifying than they had imagined. The Heavenly Earth God. They knew just how important this title was. According to the Heavenly Human Tribe higher-ups, the Heavenly Tao had 6 paramount heavenly gods, which were heaven, earth, ocean, life, light, and darkness. They represented the paramount will of the Heavenly Tao and were also the most fundamental authority of the Heavenly Tao. They also had the right to bestow powers upon other living beings. For example, Lan Xiaoni's power of water had been bestowed upon her by the Heavenly Sea God. The Heavenly Sea God was split into 2 factions. One was the radical faction that wanted to cleanse the entire continent, while the other was the moderate faction that only wanted to cleanse the human race. The moderate faction, led by the Heavenly Human Tribe United Army, was led by the Heavenly Light Goddess. Aside from her, the ocean and earth gods were also the main forces of the moderate faction. Now that one of the 6 paramount heavenly gods, the Heavenly Earth God, had appeared before everyone, how could they remain calm and collected? Unlin's confidence in joining forces with the ancient Dragon Empress instantly vanished, and he yelled at the youth in the distance, "Chen Chen. Let's switch opponents." "Chen Chen." The youth hesitated momentarily before tossing a ball of white light toward the celestial arch. "Your aptitude is no less inferior to mine, but you're just a useless piece of trash in a battle against the heavens. If you want to save everyone's lives, then use it." The celestial arch turned to the celestial arch before arriving beside Enlin in a flash. The celestial arch stared blankly at the ball of light before him. What was this? Why was Chen Chen giving this to him? Even though he didn't know what this was, he could clearly sense the extremely rich heaven-crushing intent emanating from the ball of light. It was quite clear that this ball of light was the essence of the heaven-crushing sect. "No. I'm a member of the heaven-mending sect. How could I accept a gift from the heaven-crushing sect? This is clearly an extremely important item of the heaven-crushing sect." The celestial arch knew that if he accepted this item, he would be siding with the heaven-crushing sect. The enemy was trying to use a sugar-coated bullet to corrupt his mind. Black Spirit Snake and White Spirit Snake also turned toward the celestial arch, clearly curious as to what choice he would make. They knew that this was an important decision, but they wouldn't interfere. Regardless of whether it was to accept the heaven-mending sect or accept Chen Chen's heaven-crushing sect, there were pros and cons to both decisions. Chen Chen faced the paramount heavenly earth god with a calm expression. He didn't do anything and appeared extremely mundane, but in the eyes of all of the mighty figures present, he was like a peerless, unparalleled being. He was facing an ordinary heavenly god, but the celestial Thearcha's power. The celestial Thearcha's heavenly deity of God. At this moment, Enlin and Su Xiaolan had already charged toward the heavenly mountain god. The ancient Dragon Empress also rushed toward the heavenly metal god and unleashed her heavenly earth god's wrath upon the heavenly metal god. Of the heavenly god. However, he didn't need to use his 9th divine halo. The heavenly gods had already appeared, and even the heavenly earth god had decided to attack. All he had to do was hold off those Tao integration stage super mighty figures. With this in mind, Heavenly God Jordan looked up at the celestial arch, Black Spirit Snake, White Spirit Snake, and the others with a hint of confidence in his golden eyes. The celestial arch couldn't take it any more upon seeing this. What was that expression supposed to mean? Did he think he was some kind of bug? Black Spirit Snake and White Spirit Snake were already charging toward Heavenly God Jordan. Heavenly God Jordan didn't even want to try and kill them. All he wanted was to remain undefeated. He only unleashed 6 divine halos, and he looked quite relaxed and carefree. During this short period of time, the celestial arch thought about many things. He looked at the alluring ball of light beside him, and his extremely profound heaven-crushing true intent erupted forth, as if it were going to tear open the heavens. "I'm the second in command of the heaven-mending sect, so I'm not going to betray my own Tao. Only by knowing yourself and your enemy can you emerge victorious. I accepted this so that I can better understand the heaven-crushing sect, so that I can defeat them. The celestial Dharch took a deep breath to calm himself down. He extended a hand. He absorbed the ball of light. Enlightenment, paramount heaven-crushing true intent surged into the celestial Thearcha's mind like a tidal wave. A paramount voice erupted, as if it were the rumbling of the great Tao. The lifespan of heaven and earth is infinite, but there will always be calamities. The first is the chaotic calamity, the second is the cataclysm, and the third is the realm spirit calamity. The heavenly Tao has an infinite lifespan, but it is not invincible. Anything can become the heavenly Tao and replace it. It can be a cultivator beyond the heavens, it can be a flower in the mountains, it can even be a speck of dust. The celestial Dharch received an extremely vast amount of information, including his understanding of the heavenly Tao, but most of it was about how to crush the heavens and how to replace them. This was an extreme temptation. If he succeeded, he would ascend to the paramount realm. It had to be said that the celestial Dharch was very tempted for a split second, and he wanted nothing more than to run over and ask Chen Chen what the final step was. However, his resolute Tao heart allowed him to regain his clarity of mind in a very short time, and he began to carefully reflect on each and every technique related to crushing the heavens. Her Majesty Nuwa didn't stop us from attacking the southern heavenly gate, which means that the heavenly human tribe and the heavenly gods are also a major obstacle to the heaven-mending sect. Regardless of whether it's a black cat or a white cat, it's a good cat if it can catch mice. The celestial Thearcha's aura transformed from an ethereal and unfathomable aura to a paramount emperor that soared into the sky and threatened to shatter the entire heavens. I, the celestial Dharch, am going to slay a god today. The celestial Dharch materialized clouds and mist into a sword, and a paramount power descended upon the sword. Borrowing the power of the heavens. Bam! His body broke through 100 times the speed of sound as he hurtled toward Heavenly God Jordan at an extremely fast speed. Heavenly God Jordan snapped his fingers nonchalantly upon seeing the celestial Thearcha's attack, and the blue divine halo around his waist created an indestructible barrier in front of him. Whoosh! The cloud mist sword blade descended and smashed into the barrier. The blue barrier, which was imbued with the will of the heavens, began to crack open in the face of the terrifying sword strike, but it still managed to hold on. Heavenly God Jordan was just about to retreat gracefully like he had done in the past. All of a sudden, an extremely terrifying heaven-crushing true intent erupted from the sword strike. Boom! The barrier exploded. Heavenly God Jordan's pupils contracted with incredulity as he looked at the approaching cloud and mist sword strike. He was clearly not expecting the celestial Dharch to be able to use a heaven-crushing technique, and he was doing it so well. It was too fast. There was no time for him to evade. The sword strike fell like lightning, tearing through Heavenly God Jordan's body and sending a fountain of white blood gushing forth. The celestial Thearcha's calm expression was imbued with peerless heaven-crushing intent. Borrowing the power of the heavens, heaven-crushing Tao. Chapter 1568. Heavenly God Jordan hurtled back in retreat. How could the celestial emperor let him escape? He chased after him with the cloud mist heavenly sword in hand. Sky-piercing chains. Heaven-breaking heart-hooking sword. Sky-shattering frost chrysanthemum explosion. The celestial Dharch seemed to have opened his conception and governor meridians, and he unleashed a series of strange yet extremely powerful heaven-crushing techniques to strike Heavenly God Jordan with blood-curdling cries. Black Spirit Snake and White Spirit Snake were both dumbstruck. They were even beginning to suspect that the celestial Dharch was a spy sent by the heaven-crushing sect to infiltrate the heaven-mending sect. How could someone who had just obtained heaven-crushing true intent unleash such a powerful heaven-crushing technique? What the F***CK was that? The two Snake Spirit Clan sisters were thinking the exact same thing as Heavenly God Jordan at this moment. He refused to believe that the celestial Dharch was able to unleash such a terrifying technique right after attaining the heaven-crushing technique. The celestial Dharch was definitely playing dumb. However, this was actually the celestial Thearcha's sudden enlightenment. It was as if he had discovered a new continent, and he unleashed the heaven-crushing true intent that he had just attained. The more he used it, the more powerful it became. There were even some core heaven-crushing true intent that resonated with some of his thoughts about studying the heavens, and he had even developed a sense of agreement with it. What was even more astonishing to the celestial Dharch was that his heaven-crushing true intent had fused with the power of the heavens, resulting in an even more astonishing power. This was why heavenly god Jordan was suddenly being pummeled by the celestial Dharch. He didn't care that the Sky Emperor was letting himself go at the side. On the heavenly mountain god battlefield, Enlil and Su Xiaolan fought side by side. They'd received Raphael's treatment and the Tao insight bestowed upon them after Raphael's death, causing their injuries and strength to recover greatly, and they had the confidence to battle once more. Evil Sword Technique Final Form, Eternal Night. A dark divine tool domain proliferated forth, dragging the heavenly mountain god into a special space. Enlil raised his evil-slaying sword high into the air before slashing downward. The sword intent imbued with the intent of termination swept toward the heavenly mountain god as invisible ripples. The heavenly mountain god's feet didn't move as it launched an almighty fist. Bang! The boundless power of the mountain range crushed the eternal night sword intent, as well as the evil-slaying sword's divine tool domain. At this moment, the air suddenly became extremely hot. The heavenly mountain god abruptly turned around as the dragon sparrow's sword rang from behind it. Su Xiaolan unleashed her true dragon and vermilion bird mystic technique again, and her aura soared explosively as holy flames revolved around her sword blade as she slashed it toward the heavenly mountain god's body. The heavenly mountain god's movements weren't actually all that fast. In fact, it couldn't even keep up with Su Xiaolan's sword speed. The dragon sparrow sword crashed viciously into the heavenly mountain god's chest, and heaven-crushing true intent pierced through the clouds, as if a true dragon were roaring and a vermilion bird were soaring into the heavens. This was already an extremely advanced heaven-crushing technique. However, a sharp screeching sound erupted upon striking the heavenly mountain god's body. That extremely frightening might and sharp edge merely tore an extremely tiny crack on the tough skin with distinct lines. It was as though another line had been carved on the skin, and it was completely harmless. So hard. That was Su Xiaolan's first thought. At this moment, a sandbag-sized fist was already descending upon her. The fist expanded relentlessly in her eyes. In that instant, Su Xiaolan felt as if she could see a gargantuan mountain that struck despair into her heart crashing down upon her. She was going to be crushed into mincemeat in the next second. This was an illusion created by her opponent's extremely powerful true intent. An azure dragon suddenly appeared before revolving around Su Xiaolan's body to form an indestructible true dragon wall. Su Xiaolan had undergone the only dual Tao integration stage on the Tai Chu continent, with the Tao of the true dragon focusing on defense and the Tao of the vermilion bird focusing on offense. Bam! An overwhelming power imbued with the paramount power of laws that could crush all things swept toward her. If it weren't for the fact that Su Xiaolan's true dragon wall was imbued with extremely powerful heaven-crushing true intent, her defenses would have been instantly broken, and her body would have been pulverized by the fist. A massive explosion erupted throughout heaven and earth. The azure dragon let loose an anguished wail as its body began to shatter. Su Xiaolan felt a burst of power pierce through the true dragon wall before striking her body. She threw up a mouthful of blood as her body tumbled into the distance. Even though she had made ample preparations, she was still unable to completely defend herself against the heavenly mountain god's attack. At this moment, spatial fluctuations suddenly erupted. The heavenly mountain god's expression finally shifted drastically. It didn't even have a chance to do anything before its head was struck by an extremely terrifying burst of energy. Its tough skin instantly cracked open, as if it had been sliced into tens of thousands of pieces. Enlil held his evil-slaying sword and panted heavily as he looked up at the heavenly mountain god. He had just unleashed one of the evil-slaying sword's most powerful killing techniques, vanquish the heavens and slay all evil annihilation. The heavenly mountain god was the first being that he was unable to use his annihilation technique to make any part of its body disappear. It was indeed very hard. "What spell technique is this?" a hoarse yet powerful voice sounded. A dazzling divine light erupted from the earthy divine halo above the heavenly mountain god's head, and its shattered face was restored to its chiseled head. Enlil positioned his sword before him as he spoke in a cold voice. "This is the dog-beating sword technique." Everyone instantly fell silent. The heavenly mountain god took a deep breath and continued to stand on the spot in a calm and collected manner. Only now did Enlil realize that the heavenly mountain god hadn't moved an inch since the beginning of the battle. Was it as immovable as a mountain? Was it flexing on purpose? Or was it really unable to move? Or would there be negative repercussions if it did move? Countless speculations suddenly appeared in his mind as he thought of countless countermeasures. At this moment, the heavenly mountain god took a couple of steps forward and crossed its arms. "Very good. You have what it takes for me to take you seriously. I'm going to kill you before the heavenly earth god takes care of Chin Chin." Enlil. All right, so all of his previous countermeasures had been King Bulsh *T. A series of resounding booms suddenly erupted in the sky. The stars and moon in the sky suddenly disappeared, and a vast expanse of darkness descended upon the world. At the same time, an unprecedented sense of pressure suddenly enveloped Enlil and Su Xiaolan. This was a sense of powerlessness and insignificance in the face of an unimaginably gargantuan being. The reason why the sky above had turned dark was because there was a mountain with no end in sight. It covered the entire sky and was rapidly falling from the firmament. With Enlil's current power, he could slice a divine mountain over 100,000 feet in half with a single sword strike. However, he was struck by a sense of despair in the face of this boundless mountain. Was this a King mountain? This heavenly god had most likely just tossed an entire continent into the sky. The heavenly mountain god spread its palms open, and an unprecedented earthy divine light erupted from the divine halo above its head as it activated its power of the heavenly gods to the maximal extent. Heavenly God Technique. The Fall of Mount Buzhou. Chapter 1569. This was an indescribable mountain. Beyond the Northwest Sea, in a corner of the great wilderness, there was a mountain known as Mount Buzhou. It only existed in legends, and no one had ever seen its true appearance. However, as soon as it appeared, all living beings in this world would feel boundless reverence in their hearts, and they would naturally recognize its name. The master of all divine mountains, Mount Buzhou. The reason why Mount Buzhou was called Buzhou was that it was incomplete and flawed. However, no one knew exactly where the flaw was. There were countless mountains in this world, but no one could say that they were incomplete. However, Mount Buzhou made all living beings feel that it was incomplete the instant they laid eyes on it. It was as if it were defining what was complete and what was incomplete. It was not only a mountain, but it was also the Tao. Are you kidding me? The heavenly mountain god dynasty lost Mount Buzhou to me? Enlil was a little dumbstruck. For the first time, he was struck by a sense of despair. This mountain was simply too massive, so massive that he didn't even know how to deal with it. Immortal mountains and divine mountains were as insignificant as ants in the face of Mount Buzhou. Enlil even had a feeling that if Mount Buzhou were to fall, the entire continent would be reduced to rubble. Enlil, calm down. All of this is fake. If the heavenly mountain god really could move Mount Buzhou here, the entire kingdom of the 9 states would have been destroyed by it a long time ago. Su Xiaolan yelled. Her words instantly brought Lin back to his senses. If the heavenly mountain god really was that bad *SS, why would it wait until now to strike? It's fake, it has to be fake. Even though its aura was super terrifying and realistic, and even the cells in his body were trembling instinctively in fear, it couldn't be real. Lin consoled himself over and over again, and his fighting spirit was instantly reinvigorated. He stomped his foot into the ground, and his body rose into the sky as he flew toward the boundless, gargantuan Mount Buzhou. Seeing as it's not the real Mount Buzhou, what do I have to fear? Lin repressed the fear in his heart as a wind divine halo appeared above his head, upon which his aura was boundlessly majestic, as if he were a wind paragon descending upon this world. Extreme wind, sky blade. Streams of wind revolved around the evil-slaying sword as it unleashed its heavenly wind power to the extreme. The wind blew for 300 li, transforming into a heaven-splitting blade. White light instantly illuminated the entire mountain. The boundless sharpness contained the absolute will of the laws, slicing through everything. Hua! As expected, the heavenly blade slashed into the bottom of Mount Buzhou and went all the way up to the sky, cutting the boundless Mount Buzhou into two very quickly like a line in the sky. Lin heaved a sigh of relief, feeling that the illusion had been broken. Then, in the next moment, he was horrified to find that Mount Buzhou was really cut in half when he said that it was cut in half. Only a small crack was cut in the middle of the mountain by the heavenly blade, and it spread to the top of the mountain. Then, it continued to fall with great power. What the F***ck? Lin's eyes widened. He couldn't find words to describe his current F***-up feelings. Rumble. At this moment, Mount Buzhou had already smashed into Lin. It was as if the terrifying power was trying to completely pulverize his body. This was true power, boundless weight, and boundless power of mountains. It was 100 times more terrifying than the five-finger mountain that had sealed the great sage, heaven's equal. Lin didn't even have a chance to react before he was smashed into the ground by Mount Buzhou, as if it were trying to crush him into mincemeat and dust. Lin! Su Xiaolan let loose a cry of surprise as she flew toward Lin without any hesitation. At the same time, she unleashed her true dragon wall to envelop Lin and herself. The true dragon divine Tao, which had fused with its heaven-crushing true intent, crashed toward Mount Buzhou like a divine dragon. However, Mount Buzhou didn't slow down in the slightest, and it continued to fall with boundless power. Lin finally had a chance to catch his breath as Su Xiaolan unleashed her true dragon wall to protect him. He immediately unleashed his wind of absolute power and evading turtle technique to envelop the two of them. True dragon wall, evading turtle technique, and wind of absolute power. 3 top-of-the-line protective spell techniques enshrouded the two of them. The two of them were still quite unsure of what to do, and they hugged each other for warmth as they screamed at the top of their lungs. Then, Mount Buzhou crashed into the ground in a merciless and ferocious manner. Boom! The mountain crashed and the earth tremored violently. Heaven and earth crumbled. The boundless earth caved in for over 1,000 kilometers under the weight of the mountain. The shock wave of energy swept through the air, annihilating everything around it. The celestial arch, heavenly god Jordan, and the ancient dragon empress were all knocked back a certain distance by the shock wave. Xianyuan Cheng and the others, who were spectating from afar, were also knocked flying for tens of thousands of meters. Master's wife. Yi Ling's features paled as she looked up at the gargantuan mountain before her. Holy F***ck. Is this Mount Buzhou real? It can really smash people? Xianyuan Cheng was a little dumbstruck. Of course it's fake. The mountain is indeed very tall and massive, but it's not as boundless and majestic as it appears to us. Countless streams of information flashed through Bai Ling's eyes as she said in a calm voice, however, the power of Mount Buzhou is real. Everyone couldn't help but take a deep breath when they heard this. This proved that Enlin and Su Xiaolan really had been smashed by Mount Buzhou. Even though the celestial arch was battling heavenly god Jordan, he couldn't help but look up at the gargantuan mountain and the crater in the ground. The heavenly mountain god was quite a vicious character. It appeared to be very honest, but when it came to battle, it really was quite ruthless. Enlin and Su Xiaolan had already been smashed to the very bottom of the mountain. There were countless divine symbols and inky black patterns carved into the mountain, creating an invincible sealing formation that would most likely be able to seal even the most powerful godfiends. The heavenly mountain god panted heavily, and its divine halo had also dimmed significantly. It had clearly expended a lot of its energy to unleash this attack. It didn't actually look down on Enlin as it did on its face. On the contrary, in its eyes, Enlin was one of the top 3 most dangerous mighty figures present. It was exactly because of this that it took this opportunity to unleash its most powerful attack from the get-go. All of this was done in order to take care of this dangerous man as quickly as possible. The heavenly mountain god looked up at the gargantuan divine mountain before it and nodded with satisfaction. The Mount Buzhou that I summoned is indeed not the real Mount Buzhou, but it is a projection of Mount Buzhou's power. In other words, this Mount Buzhou is a miniature version of Mount Buzhou, which is more than enough to smash you too. The heavenly mountain god nodded with satisfaction before turning its attention to the other battles taking place on the other battlefields. Heavenly metal god, heavenly god Jordan, heavenly earth god, which side was it going to help next? Chapter 1570. On the heavenly earth god's battlefield, no one dared to approach him. Only a handsome youth in linen garments was calmly appraising this paramount heavenly god being with his clear eyes. This was the second heavenly disciple of the heaven-crushing sect, Chen Chen. He was one of the most hated and feared beings of the heavenly Tao. The heavenly earth god was also appraising this legendary figure, and was in no hurry to attack. The two of them seemed to be locked in a peaceful standoff. Outside the battlefield, Chen Chen and the heavenly earth god haven't begun their battle yet? Yao Mingxi asked. Sun Yulua crossed his arms over his sword with a thoughtful expression. Perhaps they've already begun their battle. Su Qinyun's dreamy blue eyes widened as she blinked. Wow, I can't even see their battle. Could this be a battle between powerful beings? That's right, a battle between powerful beings could very well have already begun. Our cultivation bases aren't high enough, so we can't tell, the Fist Sage chimed in. Dabai was shocked. Is this the world of powerful beings? Woof. No, they're just spouting nonsense, Bai Ling concluded mercilessly. Is no one concerned about Giant Enlin? Tina was a little concerned. Don't worry, if classmate Enlin is crushed to death, there's no way Chen Chen would be so calm. Xianyuan Cheng was very familiar with this kind of thing. Chen Chen's evaluation of Enlin had clearly surpassed everyone else's. If Enlin was crushed to death right in front of him, he would definitely be enraged. Is Master going to be flattened? Merlin stared at Mount Buzhou with his eyes fixed on it. Will I accidentally bleed? Cassidy licked the corner of her lips with a mesmerized expression. Everyone automatically ignored these two nutjobs. Merlin was holding a piece of dirt that was stained with blood, and he was munching on it with relish. Meanwhile, Cassidy carefully extracted the blood from the dirt before licking the blood with her little tongue and swallowing it as she moaned in a seductive manner. This blood was all the blood that fell from Enlin's body during the battle. When they were eating melons and had nothing to do, they would secretly help clean up the battlefield, collect Enlin's blood, and then slowly taste it. Although the blood wasn't fresh enough, it was still a supreme delicacy. My Tao of Blood Massacre has reached a bottleneck, and the threshold to Tao integration is right in front of me. I'll have a chance to Tao integration if I can comprehend something new. Cassidy's eyes flickered with excitement. The same goes for my blood soul Tao. The sacred ancestor will be our guiding light. Merlin stared up at Mount Buzhou with a scorching expression, as if he could see the mesmerizing sight of the man at the foot of Mount Buzhou. Chun Chun and the heavenly earth god were still locked in a stalemate. The heavenly mountain god chose not to disturb them and turned its attention elsewhere. The battle between the heavenly metal god and the ancient dragon empress had already reached a climax. The inky black woman summoned countless pieces of chaotic immortal metal, which were unleashed upon the ancient dragon empress from all angles like a torrential storm of pear blossoms. Chaotic immortal metal was known as the sharpest metal in the universe, and it could be forged into an extremely rare immortal tool that could slice through the divine Tao with ease. Now, metals of this caliber were flying toward the ancient dragon empress as if they were free. Even the super tycoons of the cultivation world would be struck with a sense of foreboding. The ancient dragon empress body leaped through the air as she evaded the countless streaks of golden light. Her hands were enshrouded in her paramount evil dragon divine Tao, and she swatted away any chaotic immortal metal that she couldn't evade. The chaotic immortal metal was simply far too powerful. Even though she swatted away all of the chaotic immortal metal blades, there were still times when she missed, and a series of wounds of varying depths appeared on her hands. The heavenly metal god chortled with glee upon seeing this before tossing a few hundred durian-shaped chaotic immortal metal blades toward the ancient dragon empress. "Let's see how you defend yourself." The ancient dragon empress' flesh instantly crawled at the sight of the 360 degrees chaotic immortal metal durians. She took a deep breath before clenching her fist toward the heavenly metal god before unleashing an almighty punch. Fist of the heavenly Tao. Bam! The golden fist projection threatened to pulverize the very heavens. Space crumbled, and everything was reduced to dust. Extremely terrifying heaven-crushing energy swept forth, annihilating everything it came into contact with. Several hundred durian-shaped chaotic immortal metal blades were knocked flying, and some of them were even cracked open by the terrifying fist projection. The heavenly metal god's expression shifted drastically as she materialized an inky black metal barrier in front of her. The metal seemed to have a life of its own as its surface glowed with a faint sheen, and it seemed to be squirming. Super Cyclone Titanium Alloy. This is the most durable and defensive metal. It can defend against anything. The heavenly metal god chortled with glee. At this moment, the golden fist projection crashed down. Boom! The heavenly Tao's fist crashed into the inky black barrier, and an indescribable force left a massive dent in the barrier. The squirming black metal hissed and hissed as if it were wailing with anguish. The shock waves from his fist even passed through the heavenly metal god, annihilating the earth and crashing into Mount Bujo behind him. Even the gargantuan mountain tremored violently, and a fist indentation of unfathomable depth appeared on its surface. The ancient dragon empress slowly withdrew her fist. It can defend against anything? The heavenly metal god's body trembled as she looked at the ancient dragon empress. Her sexy, inky black body had been hammered into a bumpy shape, and there was a massive fist indentation on her body. That's right, a portion of the heavenly Tao's fist projection had pierced through the super cyclone titanium alloy and struck her body. Huff huff huff. The heavenly metal god's breathing became heavy. Her body trembled violently as she tried to revert to her original form. This was how a metal body with no elasticity was. It was very hard to recover from. Thankfully, her body was made up of extremely durable metal, and aside from being slightly deformed and damaged by the heavenly Tao's fist projection, there were no other negative effects. The ancient dragon empress was not going to wait for her to recover, and she immediately launched another attack. Her body hurtled through the air like a shooting star toward the heavenly metal god. Obedient Ghost Alloy. The heavenly metal god was enraged, and she gripped a twisted crimson longsword in her hand before slashing it toward the ancient dragon empress. This is the alloy with the most powerful curses in this world. Anyone who is wounded by this alloy will be afflicted with bad luck. In the worst-case scenario, their Tao foundation will crumble, and they might even be reduced to a puddle of blood. Even if you can withstand a portion of its power, you'll still be afflicted with an extremely vicious curse. The heavenly metal god spoke with a ferocious expression, as if she were showing off her collection as she swung the obedient ghost alloy toward the ancient dragon empress. The vermilion bird princess felt a chill run down her spine upon hearing this, and she looked down at her waist with a hint of fear in her eyes. There was a gash on her slender waist, which was a wound inflicted by the heavenly metal god while carrying Enlin and Su Xiaolan on her back. The heavenly metal god seemed to have used this obedient ghost alloy to wound her. Chapter 1571. The vermilion bird princess was panicking, and she hurriedly inspected her wound again. She discovered that there really was a peculiar power spreading from her wound to her entire body. She wanted to use her power of the divine Tao to cleanse this power, but she found that she was completely unable to do anything about it. "It's over. I've been cursed." The vermilion bird princess was on the verge of tears. At this moment, the ancient dragon empress pummeled the heavenly metal god a few more times. The heavenly metal god's face was flattened again, and her voluptuous breasts also began to bulge before sinking into her body. The heavenly metal god also used her obedient ghost alloy to wound the ancient dragon empress' arm before chortling with glee. The ancient dragon empress' expression remained unchanged as she continued to hammer the heavenly metal god. The vermilion bird princess heaved an internal sigh of relief upon seeing the ancient dragon empress' nonchalant expression. Seeing as the fourth heavenly disciple of the heaven-crushing sect was completely unfazed by this curse, she most likely had a way to deal with it. After the battle, she could just ask the ancient dragon empress for help. If she knew that the ancient dragon empress was only so calm because she wasn't afraid of death, who knew what her expression would be like? After taking care of Enlin and Su Xiaolan, the heavenly mountain god felt like the heavenly metal god didn't need any help. It turned its attention to heavenly god Jordan. Heavenly god Jordan looked like he was on the brink of death. The main reason was that the celestial Dharch was simply too ferocious. He had unleashed one heaven-crushing technique after another, and even though he had only just learned these techniques, his mastery of them was far superior to the vast majority of Tao integration stage super mighty figures. It looked like the saying that aptitude was the most important factor in the cultivation of heaven-crushing techniques was definitely true. The heaven-mending sect super mighty figure had instantly become the heaven-crushing sect super mighty figure. Black Spirit Snake and White Spirit Snake were completely convinced by this. They were initially a little displeased by Nuwa's decision to give the position of second-in-command to an outsider instead of them. However, now that the Celestial Dharch had instantly mastered the heaven-crushing techniques and created a new one on the spot, they realized that Nuwa had made the right decision. The Celestial Dharch had terrifying aptitude. Mending the heavens and crushing the heavens both required an extremely deep understanding of the Tao of heaven. The Celestial Dharch was already so exceptional, so how could he be inferior to the heaven-mending sect? Perhaps in the future, when the heaven-mending sect officially stepped onto the stage of history, the name of the Celestial Dharch would once again resound throughout the entire continent? Boom, 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 on the ground below, a series of earth-shattering spell techniques were unleashed one after another. The void exploded and the world changed color. The celestial Thearcha's white imperial robe fluttered in the wind as he chased after the heavenly god. 8 divine rings, karmic curse. Jordan roared. He had finally been forced to use all 8 of his divine halos by the Celestial Dharch alone. He crossed his hands, and countless blood-colored butterflies appeared in the air. The butterflies' radiance rippled like a dream as it pounced towards the incoming man. Ding-ling-ling, poochie, poochie. Sounds rang out one after another, connecting the past, present, and future. Every butterfly was intertwined with karma and contained an extremely strange power. Sky-shattering roar. The celestial Thearcha's mouth fell open. Roar! Rumble. The massive sky-shattering sound wave shattered all of the karmic butterflies. Heavenly God Jordan stared at the Celestial Dharch with a dumbstruck expression. What the hell? Is the celestial Tharch serious? Black Spirit Snake's expression darkened. I have to say, it really does work. White Spirit Snake covered her mouth with a faint smile. The two spectating sisters stood off to the side to admire the celestial Thearcha's self-indulgence. It had to be said that the celestial Thearcha's self-indulgence was a little unsettling, but it was also quite adorable for some reason. The celestial Tharch himself was also in high spirits, and he unleashed one extremely profound heaven-crushing technique after another toward Heavenly God Jordan. At this moment, he displayed his accumulated strength to the fullest. He even began to wonder why he would play such a boring and uninteresting technical job like mending the sky. It was so fun, so exciting, and so nerve-wracking. At this moment, an enormous aura suddenly approached from the distance. This was a paramount aura that was boundless, and all living beings couldn't help but look up at it. Jordan, let me help you. The heavenly mountain god let loose an enraged roar before joining the battle. Boom! The celestial Thearcha's fist crashed into the celestial Thearcha's heaven-crushing power with unstoppable force, and terrifying shockwaves erupted for several hundred kilometers. The celestial Thearcha's unstoppable power was thwarted for the first time, and he was knocked back a few steps. The heavenly mountain god was also knocked flying with astonishment etched on its face. It could sense extremely terrifying heaven-crushing true intent from the celestial Thearcha's spell technique. Even though the heavenly mountain god had expended a lot of energy to deal with Enlin and Su Xiaolan, it still had plenty of energy to spare, so it should have no problem dealing with super mighty figures like the celestial Tharch. However, it was struck by a sense of urgency for the first time. The celestial Tharch was not annoyed or nervous to see the heavenly mountain god intervene. Instead, he became even more excited. Heavenly mountain god, eat this! Heaven-crushing mountain-crushing claw. He formed a claw with his hand, and two dazzling golden Tharch seals appeared on his palm and the back of his hand. The power of the firmament descended and attached to the claw, forming yin and yang. At the same time, a domineering intent that seemed to say that he was the only one in the world and that even the heavens could not do anything to him spread out. The heavenly mountain god's claw was shimmering with golden light. Not only had it borrowed the power of the heavens, but it was also imbued with extremely powerful heaven-crushing true intent. What a heaven-crushing mountain-crushing claw! The heavenly mountain god burst into laughter. It was furious at the Sky Emperor's attitude. He had borrowed the power of the heavens in front of the heavens, and then transformed the power of the heavens into the power to destroy the heavens. This was a blatant provocation. It was as if someone borrowed money from you right in front of you and hired someone to kill you. This kind of scalp-numbing thing, there was actually someone who could do it. How could there be such a shameless person in this world? The heavenly mountain god's eyes widened with rage, and it completely ignored the celestial Thearcha's attack. Instead, it clenched its fist and launched a fist directly toward the celestial Thearcha's chest. The celestial Thearcha's heart jolted with shock. A fist for a claw? The celestial Tharch was only surprised for a split second before becoming even more excited, and his heaven-crushing mountain-crushing claw crashed down toward the heavenly mountain god at an even faster speed. The heaven-crushing mountain-crushing claw glowed with a golden light, and it tore through the heavenly mountain god's power barrier with extremely terrifying sharpness and profound heaven-crushing mountain true intent before stabbing into its chest, upon which it quickly slid down and sliced open its extremely sturdy chest. At the same time, the heavenly mountain god's fist had already completely fallen. A mountainous might instantly shattered the celestial Thearcha's protective immortal energy and pulverized his body, upon which he threw up a mouthful of blood and flew back like a cannonball. Both sides exchanged blows, and it could be said that both sides were injured. At this moment, heavenly god Jordan took advantage of this opportunity, and the red divine halo around his heart glowed with scintillating light as a crimson carmeline stabbed toward the celestial Tharch. The celestial Tharch had just been severely wounded, so he was completely unable to evade this sneak attack. Chapter 1572. The Celestial Emperor saw the red karma thread piercing towards him at the speed of lightning. He heaved an internal sigh. He had gotten too carried away and forgotten about Heavenly God Jordan. Heavenly God Jordan was not some weakling. If he unleashed all of his power, his combat prowess would be comparable to that of a god of creation stage being. At this moment, the karma spell techniques that he had unleashed with his 8 divine halos were on par with those of a god of creation. In such a wounded state, the celestial Dharch simply couldn't find a way to evade. However, when the red light flashed, a white shadow descended from the sky, wielding the yin and yang dual blades, cutting yin and yang and severing karma. The red karmic thread was cleanly severed by the sword ray. The white-robed woman's hair danced in the wind, and her eyes were as sharp as swords as she stared at Heavenly God Jordan with an intimidating aura. Interfering in someone else's battle is not a good habit. At this moment, a woman in a black dress descended upon Heavenly God Jordan with a massive sword in her hand. Heaven-splitting great treasured sword. Rumble! A golden sword projection pierced through heaven and earth, sending Heavenly God Jordan flying for several kilometers. The celestial Dharch heaved a sigh of relief before charging toward the Heavenly Mountain God again. The Heavenly Mountain God chortled with glee as the massive gash on its chest began to quickly heal. Celestial Dharch, my body is like an eternal mountain that can last for countless years. My life force is beyond your imagination. Your attack doesn't even hurt me. If we were to exchange blows, the one who would die would definitely be you. The celestial Thearcha's battle intent surged as he formed a claw with one hand, and 2 dazzling golden imperial seals appeared on his palm and the back of his hand. The power of the heavens descended onto the claw, and at the same time, a domineering true intent that even the heavens couldn't do anything to spread out. The Heavenly Mountain God's eyelids twitched. Again. Ha ha. If you're a man, then your fists will hit the target. The celestial Dharch let out a hearty laugh as his aura soared into the heavens, and he launched another fearless attack. Heaven-crushing mountain-splitting claw. All of your punches connected. The Heavenly Mountain God's eyes widened. You're clearly using your claws. As he finished speaking, he also launched a fist toward the celestial Dharch. The power of the heavenly Tao was unleashed to the extreme, and the power of absolute weight and kinetic energy transformed into a power that could crush everything in its path. Bang! It was as if an ancient bell was ringing, and the sound echoed throughout the continent. The celestial Dharch was crushed by an unimaginable force, and his meridians were almost torn apart. But at this time, the celestial Thearcha's heaven-crushing mountain-splitting claw had also completely fallen. The sharp golden claws punctured the Heavenly Mountain God's indestructible body before tearing viciously at it. Rip! The earth-yellow-veined body was torn apart by the 5 claws. Ah! The Heavenly Mountain God's blood-curdling wail also erupted at this moment. How could it not hurt or itch? Heaven-crushing techniques were meant to destroy the essence of the Heavenly Tao. As a representative of the Heavenly Tao, there was no way that the Heavenly Mountain God could remain unscathed in the face of the celestial Thearcha's heaven-crushing technique. The Heavenly Mountain God was only putting on an act when it said that it wouldn't hurt at all. If he didn't cry out in pain, it meant that he wasn't strong enough. The celestial Dharch was blasted flying again as blood gushed from his mouth, but a joyful smile appeared on his face at the sight of the Heavenly Mountain God's blood-curdling cries. Turned out that even the heavens could cry out in pain. This was the first time he had fought the heavens to his heart's content, and it didn't feel too bad. The celestial Dharch was starting to understand why so many people loved the heaven-crushing sect. When they learned that the heavens could be defeated, why didn't they challenge them? This kind of magnificent and unrestrained life was the best aphrodisiac for every super-strong person. Throughout history, countless people had talked about heaven crushing and defying the heavens, but not many had actually put it into practice. Most of them were just idiots with delusions of grandeur. However, when the heaven-crushing sect appeared in this world and redefined heaven-crushing, the heaven-crushing undertaking that defied the heavens began to become the most legendary undertaking on the continent. Even though many of the powers that supported the destruction of the human race didn't want to admit it, the reality was that the heaven-crushing sect had already become the #1 power on the entire Tai Chu continent. The celestial Dharch had always looked down on the heaven-crushing sect. He felt like they were a bunch of boorish idiots who were going to drive the human race and even the entire world into a corner sooner or later. However, he was beginning to understand the heaven-crushing sect a little now. The heavens were right there. Which Cultivator didn't want to challenge the peerless Great Tao? How's that? The celestial Dharch swallowed an immortal pill before pouncing toward the heavenly mountain god with glee. You're a lunatic. The heavenly mountain god's torn body quickly healed, and it also charged toward the celestial Dharch as it unleashed its most essential power of mountains. At this moment, the earthy divine halo above its head had already dimmed slightly. The clash between the two unleashed an earth-shattering disaster. There were no living beings left within a radius of 150 kilometers. At this moment, over 500 kilometers away from the battlefield, Sun Yulua stared at the tall and slender beauty before him with a trembling voice. Pavilion Lord Bai, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to attract hatred? Bai Ling pulled out a gargantuan cannon in front of him. The cannon covered an area with a radius of over a kilometer, and the cannon had a diameter of over 1,000 feet. It was constructed from a silvery white metal with countless complex spell formations carved into its body. Not only that, but there were also all types of machinery operating at high speed on the cannon that he couldn't understand. The only thing that everyone could understand was that there was an increasingly terrifying amount of energy accumulating in the cannon's mouth. Everyone stared at Bai Ling with fear in their eyes. Bai Ling replied with a calm expression, I'm not trying to attract hatred. I'm trying to save our beloved sect leader. A hint of a smile appeared on the woman's face. Our beloved sect leader is far too useless, and he's trapped under a mountain. As an exceptional sect member, shouldn't we do something? Everyone's expression shifted again upon hearing this. Save classmate and Lin? He's trapped under such a massive mountain. Can he do it? Su Qianyun's eyes widened with a hint of uncertainty. Blast the mountain with a cannon? Merlin's lips twitched. Bai Ling looked up at the seemingly boundless mountain that extended into the clouds and nodded. We have to use the most violent method to deal with such a colossus. Seeing as we don't have the ability to move the mountain, then we'll just have to blow it up. Gasp! All of the extermination team members drew a sharp intake of breath in unison. Just how terrifyingly powerful would the cannon have to be to raise such a massive mountain to the ground? What if the cannon is too powerful and kills Master? Xiaohong asked in her sweet voice. She didn't doubt the power of Bai Ling's cannon. Instead, she was a little concerned that the cannon would be too powerful. Well, Bai Ling blinked as if she really hadn't thought of this problem. Haha. His skin is so thick, so my cannon won't be able to do anything to him. Don't worry. A reassuring smile appeared on the beautiful woman's face. Everyone became even more concerned upon seeing Bai Ling's smile. Bai Ling clapped her hands with a wide smile on her face. Alright, get away from me. My heaven-crushing cannon version 2.0 is about to be fired. Chapter 1573. The sun gradually sank below the horizon, and night fell. The 2 moons hung high in the sky, and countless stars shone dazzlingly. The night was particularly clear and bright. Next to the projection of Mount Buzhou, a petite figure was sneaking toward it. It's so big, an expression of astonishment appeared on her flawless little face as she spoke with a trembling voice. From afar, it already appeared to be very big. Now that she had snuck closer, she discovered that there were mountains everywhere. The sky was a mountain, the earth was a mountain, everything before her eyes was a mountain. It was so big that it struck despair into her heart. The young woman raised a slender foot and kicked the mountain with her red high heels. Bam bam bam. Holy F***ck, it's still so hard? There seems to be a power of laws imbued on the mountain as well. This is going to be troublesome. The young woman took a deep breath with a troubled expression. Why is it so difficult to save that B***starred and Lin? The young woman before her was none other than the 9-colored divine vermilion bird. She didn't want to get involved in a battle between heavenly gods, but she couldn't bear to see Lin get buried alive either. Out of a sense of responsibility as a friend, she decided to save Lin during the chaos. However, she was a little dumbstruck upon arriving before the projection of Mount Bujo. Mount Bujo was simply too tall, too big, and too hard. It would be impossible to move this entire mountain away. The vermilion bird princess blinked, and her eyes suddenly lit up as she murmured to herself, I can't move the entire Mount Bujo, but I can move it bit by bit. The heavenly mountain god's power of the heavenly gods can only be applied to the entire mountain. It can't encompass every single part of the mountain. All I have to do is slowly move it away and slowly erode it, and one day, she thought back to the story of Jingwei filling the sea and the foolish old man moving the mountain. The more she thought about it, the more she was moved by herself. Shamelessin, I don't know where you got your luck from, but I'm willing to do this for you. The vermilion bird princess pursed her lips before turning her eyes back to the projection of Mount Bujo. This was the most regal and beautiful mythological beast of the southern heavenly wing nation. She unleashed a top-tier earth fusion technique to slowly fuse the mountain before her into the ground behind her. The vermilion bird princess was much more powerful than the foolish old man. Every time she cast a spell, she could melt a mountain weighing over 100 million tons into the earth. The casting interval was only 10 seconds. Humph. Rogan, I believe it won't be long before I can save you from your predicament. The vermilion bird princess could already envision her becoming Lin's savior again. Lin would bow down and worship her, and even want to repay her with his body. Just thinking about it made her a little excited. Just when she was persistently moving Mount Bujo, in the distance, boundless light suddenly erupted. The firelight was particularly dazzling in the dark night. The earth trembled as an incomparably terrifying energy rapidly approached, as if it wanted to devour the entire world. The vermilion bird princess raised her head and could only see boundless golden light blanketing heaven and earth on the other side of the mountain before crashing heavily into the mountain with destructive power. Holy F***ck. Rumble. The golden cannon fire instantly engulfed everything within 1,000 miles. The cannon fire was imbued with extremely pure and explosive heaven-crushing energy, which tore through the thick armor of Mount Bujo and pulverized the gargantuan mountain. The vermilion bird princess experienced what it felt like to truly destroy heaven and earth. This type of energy had already exceeded her imagination as a Tao integration stage super mighty figure. Without a doubt, this was a world-destroying cannon. Ah! She suddenly let loose a sharp cry as her body was also engulfed by the boundless flames. She was obviously standing on the other side of Mount Bujo, where the cannons were firing. The energy from the cannon explosion was like a constantly expanding golden sun, engulfing Mount Bujo in the blink of an eye before rising into the air with countless tons of soil and rock before being pulverized and melted. This cannon blast also gave all of the powerful beings on the battlefield a fright. The heavenly metal god stared at the explosion with shock and bewilderment in her heart. If she didn't take evasive measures, she would most likely be crippled even if she didn't die. The heavenly mountain god was even more astonished. How could this be? My Mount Bujo is imbued with an enormous amount of my power of the heavenly gods. How could someone else be able to destroy the protection I've set up? The celestial Tharch chortled with glee. How could this be? My Mount Bujo is imbued with my power of the heavenly gods. How could someone else be able to destroy the protection I've set up? The heavenly mountain god's expression darkened even further upon hearing this. Is the celestial Dharch taking advantage of every opportunity to mock me? The celestial Dharch was like an indestructible god as he continued to pounce toward the heavenly mountain god. Elsewhere on the battlefield, Chun and the heavenly earth god were still locked in a standoff. Even though neither of them had engaged in battle, no one dared to approach within a radius of over 1,000 kilometers. The light from the explosion lit up the night sky in an extremely dazzling display. The heavenly earth god's body glowed with dazzling light under the light of the flames, as if he were a piece of amber. Even in the face of such an earth-shattering explosion, his expression was still completely unchanged. His expression remained unchanged even in the face of such an earth-shattering explosion. Perhaps there weren't many things in this world that could stir his emotions. As one of the 6 paramount heavenly gods of heaven and earth, he was clearly no longer on the same level as before. Chen stared intently at him before a smile suddenly appeared on his face. "I can't kill you." The heavenly earth god nodded. "I can't kill you either. Even though you are as lowly as a speck of dust, there is a universe within that speck of dust." Chen was not surprised that the heavenly earth god could see through him, and he continued in an unhurried manner, "You and I are evenly matched, so your heavenly gods are going to die, so I've won this battle." The heavenly earth god splayed open his hand. "Is that so? I don't think so." The two of them continued to stare at one another as they spoke. In a battle between powerful beings, one had to rely on one's aura and words. Beside the heaven-crushing cannon 2.0, all of the extermination team members unleashed enchantment barriers to keep the shockwaves from the cannon blast at bay. "It's over. The cannon is so powerful. Giant Enlin is going to die." Tina's features paled as she stared at the devastating power before her. She had used the curse of a goddess on Enlin. "Ahem." Bai Ling coughed lightly, and the light from the explosion made her face appear even more radiant, concealing her awkwardness very well. "Don't worry, Enlin is blessed by the heavens, so he'll be fine." Sun Yulua's lips twitched. "That's not what you said before." Yao Mingshi was astonished. So Bai Ling's description of Enlin's skin being so thick that the cannon couldn't even penetrate it has now become that Enlin is going to be blessed by the heavens. What happened in between? "It's terrifying to think about it." Xiaohong spoke in her sweet voice. "Poor holy leader." Cassidy couldn't help but burst into tears. "He's fine. Can't you see?" Chun still hasn't reacted much, which means that classmate Enlin is still safe. Xianyuan Cheng tried to console everyone again. Bai Ling turned to Xianyuan Cheng with approval in her eyes. "Everyone." So Chen's expression had become an indicator of Enlin's survival? What if he had facial paralysis? Chapter 1574. Xianyuan Cheng's words did not provide any consolation. Everyone turned toward Mount Buzhou with nervous expressions on their faces. At this moment, the destructive power unleashed by the cannon had already gradually dissipated. The gargantuan mountain had been blasted into smithereens by the cannon. All of the rocks within a radius of over 500 kilometers had become extremely red, and scorching temperatures warped the air as a series of terrifyingly hot streams of lava converged to form a river that flowed outward in all directions. A lot of violent energy was still wreaking havoc on the spot, and everything around it was as if it were a land of death. Dabai swallowed involuntarily. "Is Big Brother and still alive? Woof. I think I heard a mournful wail just now." Tina's sharp ears pricked up. Xiaohong nodded. The cry was filled with rage and indignation, as if a beautiful dream had been shattered by the cruel reality, and it was filled with boundless grief and indignation. Su Qianyun extended her slender hands and applauded. "Well said." Everyone's hearts ached for their sect leader upon hearing Xiaohong's voice analysis. "No, that anguished cry didn't come from Enlin," Bai Ling said in an indifferent voice. Her words negated all the guesses that the crowd had made before. "Could it be Master's wife?" Yi Ling's eyes widened. Gasped. Everyone drew a sharp intake of breath. Was this even more severe than before? It wasn't Xiaolan's cry either. Her voice was a little unfamiliar, but it was pleasant to the ears, like a bird. Bai Ling offered her analysis. In terms of analysis and deduction, she could be said to be the best. No one would doubt her judgment. A crisp cry suddenly erupted between heaven and earth. The dust and debris in the air were torn apart by a gorgeous figure, revealing a lithe and graceful body. This was an extremely beautiful divine vermilion bird, and as it spread its wings, its 9 colored feathers shimmered under the starry sky. It was extremely graceful and regal, and it danced in the air above. So beautiful! Su Qianyun praised from the bottom of her heart. Everyone else also felt the same way. However, they felt as if they were facing a hostile gaze. That's right, the divine vermilion bird was looking at them with an enraged and aggrieved expression. They weren't idiots, and they immediately figured out what was going on when they saw the 9-colored divine vermilion bird's expression. Thus, everyone was left in an awkward position. Upon closer inspection, many of the beautiful feathers were curled up and charred black. It was obvious that they had been blasted into dust and dirt, and their injuries were not light. The 9-colored divine vermilion bird was a mythological beast that was very fond of beauty. Their sect leader had been kind enough to save their sect leader, yet he was being treated like this. How could she not be angry? All the extermination team members stood rooted to the spot in embarrassment and guilt. Bai Ling silently put away her heaven-crushing cannon and didn't dare to say anything. At this moment, a few violent coughs broke the atmosphere. 2 figures appeared at the center of the explosion, supporting each other. Anlin's hair was disheveled and his face dirty, and there were many wounds on his body. Su Xiaolan's fair face was also charred black. Her silky black waist-length hair was now burnt black and curly. Even her favorite jade barley ink garment was in tatters. Anlin stared blankly at the apocalyptic scene around him and mumbled, "Who am I? Where am I? Why did Mount Buzhou explode?" Su Xiaolan coughed up a few mouthfuls of blood before speaking with difficulty. "I think this is a new type of spell technique created by the heavenly mountain god. It crushed us with a mountain first, then made itself detonate." Anlin was a little astonished. What an extraordinary technique! Erg! He threw up a mouthful of blood before continuing, "My evading turtle, my heavenly wind power, and your true dragon wall were able to keep the heavenly mountain god's unbreakable mountain at bay. Even though I couldn't escape, I didn't sustain any injuries. However, at this moment, Mount Buzhou suddenly exploded, shattering all 3 of our defenses and severely wounding us. If this really is a terrifying spell technique, the heavenly mountain god really is terrifying." Su Xiaolan's heart was still pounding with fear. Xianyuanqing, Su Qianyun, and the others couldn't bear to watch. A blush appeared on Bai Ling's face as she turned away. Anlin and Su Xiaolan were feeling more and more ashamed of themselves. Thankfully, neither the sect leader nor the stand-in sect leader knew that they had done it. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. At this moment, a pleasant voice sounded in the sky above. "Holy F***CK, what heavenly mountain god is this?" Bai Ling was the one who blasted open Mount Buzhou with her cannon. "I'm already in such a sorry state. The other dozen or so exceptional 4-9 immortal sect members are still watching from the sidelines. Aren't you going to say anything?" The vermilion bird princess flapped her wings with a mocking expression as she looked at everyone in the distance. Boom! Her words were like a bolt of lightning, and all of the extermination team members were rooted to the spot. They had thought that they had escaped with their lives, but the vermilion bird princess had dealt them a critical blow. Anlin and Su Xiaolan were even more shocked. "What's going on?" Su Xiaolan's eyes widened with incredulity. "You did it?" Anlin stared at everyone in the distance with incredulity on his face. Su Qianyun's face was as red as an apple, and she was unable to utter a single word. Bai Ling took a deep breath before speaking in a self-righteous manner. We're all doing this to save you. Otherwise, you'd still be trapped at the foot of Mount Buzhou. How are you going to defeat your enemies and flex then? Anlin nodded upon hearing this. That does make sense. If he didn't come out, how would he be able to flex? But you went too far. Su Xiaolan glared at Bai Ling with a hint of resentment. Then, she cast a sympathetic glance at Anlin, who was riddled with wounds and almost doubting his own existence. Bai Ling harumphed coldly and refused to admit her mistake. She had expended so much energy to save him, and she had even used her secret weapon. Do I still have to apologize to you? What a joke. Anlin didn't mind as he agreed with Bai Ling's words. If they were trapped at the foot of Mount Buzhou until the end of the battle. This wasn't the style of the Tamer of Lightning, the super-heavenly lightning god, the Lord of Transcendence, the Celestial Court's chef god, the Celestial Court's war god, the sect leader of the 4-9 Immortal sect, and Sword Immortal Anlin. Thank you, big sister Bai. Anlin looked at the graceful woman in a white dress in the distance with a serious expression. Bai Ling faltered slightly upon hearing this before a hint of mockery appeared in her eyes. What are you still standing there for? Are you going to be spectators like us? Anlin laughed heartily. You're not spectators. You're my and Xiaolan's most solid support. If it weren't for you, Xiaolan and I would still be eating dirt at the foot of the mountain. Bai Ling pursed her lips upon hearing this. Su Anyuan Cheng and the others couldn't help but burst into laughter. A sect leader like this was quite a pleasant experience to be around. This was why they would rather stay at the 4-9 Immortal sect and not return to their sections. Let's go, Xiaolan. Anlin fed an immortal pill to Xiaolan and himself before joining the earth-shattering battle again. Everyone looked on at the two of them. Even though they were in quite a sorry state, they gave everyone a sense of reliability. Under the starlight and moonlight, they were dazzling to behold. Chapter 1575. Anlin and Su Xiaolan turned their attention back to the battlefield. They hadn't decided to join in yet. The four enemies were Heavenly God Jordan, the Heavenly Metal God, the Heavenly Mountain God, and the Heavenly Earth God. Each and every one of them possessed the power to destroy an entire realm on the Tai Chu continent. It could be said that all of the enemies present were not to be underestimated. They had to choose carefully. Anlin turned to the most terrifying enemy first, the paramount Heavenly Earth God. The battlefield between Chen Chen and the Heavenly Earth God was still extremely peaceful, so peaceful that Anlin and Su Xiaolan didn't even dare to believe their eyes. Anlin's lips twitched. Isn't this a little too long? They were standing like this when we were battling the Heavenly Mountain God. They were standing like this when we were sealed beneath Mount Buzhou. They were still standing like this after Mount Buzhou was blown up. Could it be that whoever moves first dies first? Su Xiaolan's imagination was running wild. Should we go fight the Heavenly Earth God? Anlin suggested with excitement in his voice. Su Xiaolan was a little scared. I don't think so. We have to be careful. The Heavenly Mountain God is already taking so much effort, so let's not be too rash. The two of them discussed the matter briefly before moving on to another target. In truth, they were well aware of their current battle prowess. They couldn't afford to offend the six paramount Heavenly Tao Heavenly Gods, nor did they dare to offend them. Chern Chern was able to pummel the Heavenly Time God, but he didn't dare to attack the Heavenly Earth God. Just this was a clear indication of the Heavenly Earth God's combat prowess. Anlin then turned to the Heavenly Metal God. The Heavenly Metal God wielded the obedient ghost alloy sword, which flashed with a crimson light. The sharpest metal in the universe, the chaotic immortal metal, was slashing through the air around her, creating a series of dazzling streaks of golden light. Her entire body was also covered in the super cyclone titanium alloy, which was the most resilient and defensive material. The most powerful offense, the most powerful defense, and the most powerful curse. She was a super boss with a full set of godly equipment. Lin and Su Xiaolan clicked their tongues upon seeing this. What was even more surprising was that the ancient dragon empress was able to keep her opponents' attacks at bay. Each and every clash was earth-shattering, and neither side was able to gain the upper hand. The ancient dragon empress has grown a lot during the past 100 years. Lin sighed with emotion. Thinking back, she was a rookie Dao integration stage super mighty figure who couldn't even intervene in the heavenly time god's battle. In just a short span of 100 years, she was already able to hold her own against a true heavenly god. The ancient dragon empress and the heavenly metal god are engaged in an intense battle. Are we really going to intervene? Su Xiaolan turned toward Lin with an inquisitive expression. The divine phoenix maiden had always been a cold, arrogant, and opinionated loner, but now she was handing the decision over to Lin. She would go after whoever Lin said to go after. Let's wait and see. Lin felt like the ancient dragon empress didn't need any help. The two of them turned toward the heavenly mountain god. It could be said that they had the most experience in dealing with the heavenly mountain god. Subconsciously speaking, they also preferred to fight the heavenly mountain god. After all, they could take this opportunity to exact revenge on the heavenly mountain god. However, both of them faltered upon seeing the heavenly mountain god. Am I seeing things? Su Xiaolan's eyes reflected the dazzling colors in the sky as she stared blankly into the distance. Lin took a deep breath. The celestial Dharch has become so bad *SS? On the heavenly mountain god's battlefield, the celestial Dharch had transformed into an exceptional war god, and he unleashed countless heaven-crushing techniques, forcing the heavenly mountain god into retreat. The celestial Thearcha's body, which was imbued with the boundless power of mountains, was cracked open by the repeated collisions. Even though it was constantly healing, it was still unable to recover from the injuries it had sustained. The celestial Thearcha's entire body was bathed in blood, and he no longer appeared to be an ethereal and graceful immortal. He was like a maniac, a battle-crazed fiend celestial. Every single one of his attacks was imbued with a will that reigned supreme over the heavens, as if he were going to tear the entire heavens apart. Did I open the celestial Thearcha's body the wrong way? Lin's lips twitched. Su Xiaolan rubbed her eyes before nodding with incredulity. This celestial Dharch is most likely a heavenly disciple of the heaven-crushing sect, right? Lin nodded with difficulty. The proud celestial Dharch, the second in command of the heaven-mending sect, was using heaven-crushing techniques. Furthermore, it looked like he was enjoying it. Heaven-crushing tornado. Heaven-crushing mountain-crushing fist. Heaven-crushing nine-fold ocean seal. Heaven-crushing, one heaven-crushing technique after another was unleashed by the celestial Dharch, which Lin and Su Xiaolan had never seen before. The spell techniques were extremely intricate and profound, and even Lin was in awe of what they were capable of. They didn't think that the celestial Dharch had only just attained his heaven-crushing technique. What kind of heaven-crushing techniques could be used to such a bad *SS level? The celestial Dharch was definitely a heavenly disciple of the heaven-crushing sect. I feel like the heavenly mountain god isn't going to be able to hold on much longer, Su Xiaolan murmured. Not necessarily. The celestial Dharch and the heavenly mountain god have both sustained severe injuries, so the celestial Dharch has the upper hand. However, it's still unclear who will be able to hold on until the end. Lin had a lot of experience battling heavenly gods, so he was able to provide an objective assessment. No heavenly god could be underestimated. Who knew when he would throw out a move that would make people despair? At this moment, another resounding boom erupted from nearby. A woman in a white dress fell from the sky with blood staining her white robe. White spirit snake. Lin's heart jolted upon seeing this. Heavenly God Jordan stepped into the air before pouncing toward White Spirit Snake again. Black Spirit Snake slashed her realm creation evil vanquishing sword toward Heavenly God Jordan, but a golden light swept through the air to keep him at bay. Heavenly God Jordan didn't chase after White Spirit Snake. Instead, he unleashed a torrential barrage of attacks toward Black Spirit Snake. White Spirit Snake and Black Spirit Snake won't be able to keep up with Heavenly God Jordan's attack. If things continue like this, they're going to lose. Su Xiaolan turned to Enlin. Enlin nodded. All right, let's go take on the Heavenly Mountain God. Su Xiaolan nodded. All right, let's go take on Heavenly God Jordan. She faltered slightly before asking with an uncertain expression, who are we going to take on? Enlin's lips curled up as flames of battle burned in his eyes. We're going to take on the Heavenly Mountain God. Su Xiaolan. All right, let's go take on the Heavenly Mountain God. Su Xiaolan didn't ask why, and she simply followed Enlin to take on that enemy. Thus, the two of them charged toward the Heavenly Mountain God's battlefield. The Heavenly Mountain God had thought that Enlin and Su Xiaolan would go to take on Heavenly God Jordan, but it didn't think that the two of them would go toward it instead. It was already on the verge of throwing up blood from its battle with the Celestial Arch, and it was struck by a sense of convulsion upon seeing this. Are you going to disregard the lives of your teammates for the sake of revenge? The Heavenly Mountain God roared with rage. Hee. Enlin chuckled coldly before turning to the Celestial Arch. Leave the Heavenly Mountain God to me and Xiaolan. You go help Black Spirit Snake and White Spirit Snake take care of Heavenly God Jordan as soon as possible. The Celestial Arch faltered slightly before instantly realizing what Enlin was trying to do. I'll leave this to Enlin and Ms. Su Xiaolan. I'll be right back. That's right, Enlin wasn't going to take on Heavenly God Jordan as there were other people more suitable than him. With Black Spirit Snake, White Spirit Snake, and the Celestial Arch of the Heaven Crushing Sect, Heavenly God Jordan would be defeated even faster. Chapter 1576. Stop right there. Do you think that you can come and go as you please? The Heavenly Mountain God let loose an enraged roar as it chased after Enlin. Enlin and Su Xiaolan leaped forward at this moment before slashing their swords toward the Heavenly Mountain God. Even though the Heavenly Mountain God was extremely reluctant, it had no choice but to fight the two of them. Enlin wielded his evil-slaying sword and unleashed his evil sword technique, as well as the power of the Heavenly Wind God, imbuing his blade with the power of laws that could slice through all things in this world. For example, he unleashed the second technique of his evil sword technique, Lightning Spirit. His speed was drastically enhanced, and he was able to evade the Heavenly Mountain God's attack before appearing behind its opponent and unleashing a vicious sword strike. Whoosh! A sharp screeching sound erupted behind the Heavenly Mountain God. The surface of his indestructible body was actually torn apart, leaving a ghastly crack in its wake. The Heavenly Mountain God turned around with rage and launched an almighty fist toward Enlin. Enlin had only just unleashed his attack, so there was no time for him to evade. Thankfully, he had been maintaining his wind of absolute wind this entire time. Bam! An earth-shattering boom erupted. The transparent barrier of wind that could keep all powers at bay was caved in and cracked open. Enlin hurriedly retreated, and in the nick of time, he managed to completely block the power of his opponent's fist. It was also at this moment that a jade dress flashed through the air. Lightning revolved around Su Xiaolan's feet, and she instantly appeared behind the Heavenly Mountain God. A true dragon roared, and a vermilion bird let loose a piercing cry as unprecedented heaven-crushing might erupted from her dragon sparrow sword. Heaven-crushing dragon sparrow slash! A burst of domineering divine might erupted from her body as her dragon sparrow sword fell with a roar. Boom! Extremely high temperatures scorched the Heavenly Mountain God's entire body red. The peerless blade tore another massive gash into the Heavenly Mountain God's crimson back. What was worthy of mention was that the gash Enlin had unleashed just so happened to intersect with the one Su Xiaolan had unleashed, thereby creating a perfect X shape. The heavenly mountain god turned around again before unleashing an enraged hammer toward Su Xiaolan. Su Xiaolan had learned her lesson from Enlin's mistake, and she was already on her guard. As soon as the heavenly mountain god attacked, she had already thought of a path of retreat, and she unleashed her vermilion bird movement technique to dodge to the side. The vermilion bird's movement techniques were extremely fast and ethereal, and they allowed her to evade all lock-ons in a short time, thereby allowing her to evade the heavenly mountain god's punch by a hair's breadth. Trying to run? The heavenly mountain god was clearly already enraged, and its body hurtled toward Su Xiaolan at an extremely terrifying speed. At this moment, Su Xiaolan felt as if she was looking at a boundless mountain pressing down on her. If she didn't take any action, she would be smashed into pieces by this attack in the next second. At the critical moment, Su Xiaolan turned to look at Enlin. Their eyes met. Their thoughts were also revealed at this moment. On the back of Su Xiaolan's hand, a crimson insignia glowed with scintillating light. This was half of a phoenix. On the back of Enlin's hand, a crimson insignia had also appeared. This was the other half of the blood phoenix. If the two halves of the phoenix were combined, they would be able to form a blood phoenix mythological beast. Boundless red light suddenly erupted from the intersection of the two rifts on the heavenly mountain god's back. That's right, when Su Xiaolan decided to attack the heavenly mountain god, she had already detected the power of the blood phoenix that Enlin had left within the heavenly mountain god's body. Without any communication, she had already coordinated with Enlin's attack and also left a wisp of the power of the blood phoenix within the heavenly mountain god's body. The center where the two forces converged and fused was the intersection point of that fork. Su Xiaolan swung her dragon sparrow sword through the air. Falling star, Enlin raised an arm high into the air. Setting sun. The two of them yelled in unison, heaven-crushing strike. The incomplete power of the blood phoenix fused together to become complete again. The blood phoenix rose into the sky as boundless heaven-crushing divine flames erupted from the heavenly mountain god's body. Boom! The earth tremored violently. The crimson phoenix spread open its wings, which lit up the entire heavens. It was as if it had passed through the heavenly mountain god's body, upon which extremely high temperatures began to melt and destroy everything within the heavenly mountain god's body. It was as if a star had fallen, as if the sun had descended. The heavenly mountain god let loose an involuntary wail of anguish in the face of this attack, which was imbued with its soul and love. This was true agony, agony that seeped into its bones. It was quite clear that this extremely unique heaven-crushing technique was extremely damaging to a representative of the heavenly Tao, even more so than the heavenly mountain god had anticipated. The heavenly mountain god was struck by a deep sense of grief. It had finally gotten rid of a heaven-crushing technique prodigy, only to be replaced by two more. The blood phoenix heaven-crushing divine flames transformed the earth into a sea of flames. It took advantage of the explosion. Su Xiaolan quickly retreated to open up some distance between them. Her features were slightly pale. That combination technique had expended a large amount of her energy, and even her vermilion bird flame energy was almost completely depleted. With this in mind, she opened her storage ring and swallowed another immortal pill. She couldn't afford to be stingy in a battle of this caliber, so she had to use all of the resources available to her. Otherwise, if she were to lose, she would be greeted by death. Enlin made his way over to Su Xiaolan's side with a smile on his face. Su Xiaolan, we really are a match made in heaven. Even when we're fighting, we have such chemistry. A faint blush appeared on Su Xiaolan's face. Be serious. Enlin smiled. The heavenly mountain god expended most of its energy to seal us with Mount Buzhou, then had its energy depleted by the celestial Dharch in exchange for more blood. Now it's at a critical juncture. Didn't you see how its movements have slowed down just then? The heavenly mountain god's power has declined significantly, so we can win as long as we hold on. An enraged roar erupted from within the crimson divine flames. The flames of the blood phoenix began to quickly recede, as if something were engulfing them. Anlin and Su Xiaolan's expressions shifted at the same time. In the center of the sea of fire, there was a tall and stalwart figure standing proudly. A hole had been punctured into its body, from which crimson lava was flowing. Its earthy yellow body had become as scorching as the sun, and it was glowing with a reddish-golden color. There were also streams of lava flowing relentlessly from the veined grooves on its body. All of the blood phoenix divine flames on the ground below had been absorbed into its body. At the same time, its body temperature rose once again, and it continued to rise higher and higher, as if there was no limit. The terrifyingly high temperatures even made the space around it twist and warp. Its earthy yellow eyes had become crimson, and a dangerous light flashed through them. Huff, huff! A series of panting sounds erupted, like the roars of a ferocious beast. The heavenly mountain god stared at Anlin and Su Xiaolan, and its aura became more and more terrifying and unfathomable. Su Xiaolan and Anlin both took an involuntary step back. Anlin drew a sharp intake of breath. That technique we used just then. Could it be that the rock golem evolved into a giant lava beast? Chapter 1577. The heavenly mountain god had sustained a combined attack from Anlin and Su Xiaolan, and even though it had sustained some severe injuries, it had also transformed into a completely different form. Lava surged all over its body, and its stone body was imbued with unbelievably high temperatures. If this were a normal stone, it would have most likely been instantly vaporized by such high temperatures. The heavenly mountain god's body was only able to maintain its original form after being enhanced by the power of the heavenly Tao. Scorching heat waves proliferated outward, and the ground within a radius of over 50 kilometers began to turn red and scorching hot. My God, this temperature has to be at least a few million degrees. Anlin's flesh crawled. That's far more than that. Su Xiaolan was even more sensitive to flames, and her heart was thumping with fear and trepidation. The heavenly mountain god's body temperature is probably over 100 million degrees. Anlin was given a massive fright. Then wouldn't we be scalded to death just by touching it? Su Xiaolan rolled her eyes. Perhaps we'll be melted before we even get close to it? The ground around the heavenly mountain god had already been melted into a scorching liquid, and the closest area had even been vaporized to form a cavern. It stepped through the air and made its way toward Anlin and Su Xiaolan, melting everything in its wake. Seeing as you two like to play with fire so much, I'll play with you, the heavenly mountain god said in a cold voice before abruptly disappearing on the spot. Anlin could feel the surrounding air temperature rising once again. In the next instant, the heavenly mountain god had already appeared before him, and boundless scorching lava erupted from its fist before crashing down with extremely terrifying power. Crimson lava instantly exploded, obscuring his entire field of vision. Anlin unleashed his heavenly wind power without any hesitation. Evil sword technique, heaven-crushing royal divine monarch. An extremely powerful sword intent soared into the sky as the paramount power of wind converged on the blade of the sword before crashing down toward the scorching lava. Boom! A peerlessly powerful sword intent imbued with the absolute heavenly wind power clashed violently with the mountainous lava. In an instant, the sharp light swept out and tore the earth apart. Scorching energy splashed in all directions like fireballs shooting out in all directions. Wherever it passed, even the earth was melted and a bottomless black hole was formed. The huge impact made Anlin feel like his body was about to fall apart. That terrifying temperature seemed like it was about to melt his body. Anlin felt like if it weren't for the fact that he had the wind of absolute death to protect his body would have most likely been incinerated or even melted in the instant that he clashed with the heavenly mountain god. The moves of the two collided. The heavenly mountain god was forced back a few steps, and Anlin was forced back several hundred meters. His entire body was scorching hot, and his skin was bright red, as if he were about to be burned. In this battle, it was clear that he was at a disadvantage. At this moment, Su Xiaolan took advantage of the instant the heavenly mountain god was knocked back to spring into action. An azure figure flashed to the heavenly mountain god's side, and the lightning blade of the dragon sparrow sword flashed toward the heavenly mountain god's neck like a bolt of lightning. The heavenly mountain god didn't have a chance to retaliate, and its head abruptly tilted to the side. Bam! Su Xiaolan's pupils contracted, and she almost threw up a mouthful of blood upon seeing this. The heavenly mountain god had managed to clamp the sword blade between its cheek and shoulder with the power of tilting its head to the side. No matter how much lightning flashed on the sword blade, it was unable to advance even an inch. This was the first time that Su Xiaolan had had her attack blocked in such a manner. She was just about to increase the force of her attack when she caught sight of the heavenly mountain god's mocking expression. Lava, volcanic eruption. The heavenly mountain god's body suddenly began to glow with scintillating light, and the temperature around it soared explosively once again, as if all of the energy that had been repressed for countless years had been released in that instant. Boom! An earth-shattering boom erupted. Boundless red lava imbued with extremely high temperatures instantly exploded. The lava exploded like flowers of death blooming between heaven and earth, becoming extremely dazzling under the night sky, as if heaven and earth had been stained crimson. Once a high-temperature attack was attached to something, it would become the most devastating, most durable, and most difficult to defend against. Su Xiaolan possessed the vermilion bird divine Tao, so it could be said that she was immune to all high temperatures. However, in the face of the heavenly mountain god's flames, she discovered that her heat resistance was a little lacking. She was suddenly struck by an unbearably scorching sensation, and burn marks instantly appeared on her body. Vermilion bird flame escape. She transformed her body into flames and quickly fled. However, the fleeing holy vermilion flame was also instantly engulfed by the surging lava. Xiaolan! Anlin's expression shifted drastically upon seeing this, and he immediately pulled out an immortal sword. Sword Burial! Dark Dragon Ice Sword! The snowy white longsword with dragon patterns imbued with immortal tool energy fluctuations exploded violently. The shattered sword blade danced through the air like countless shards of ice, enshrouded by gusts of gentle wind. Anlin's eyes were extremely profound, and the divine halo above his head glowed with a scintillating light, making him appear as if he were a paramount god who ruled over heaven and earth. He gripped the countless shards of ice in his hand. Power of the heavenly wind god! All of the essence within the immortal tool was completely unleashed at his behest. A blue divine light was imbued with boundless frost, and the power of wind instantly proliferated throughout the entire heaven and earth. Snow and ice rained down from the sky. Even the lava erupting from the heavenly mountain god faltered in the face of this extreme frost. At this moment, a gargantuan ice dragon with a length of several dozen kilometers flashed through the air at the pinnacle of the heavens before crashing down toward the heavenly mountain god like a dragon descending from the heavens. Before the dragon had even arrived, the extreme frost was already clashing with the scorching heat of the lava. The blue frost power and the crimson yang power clashed, causing the space around them to twist and tear apart. As the ice dragon fell, the blue frost power became more and more intense, as if it were going to freeze everything in this world and plunge everything into a deathly cold. The heavenly mountain god was not fearful in the slightest as it unleashed a full-force punch toward the ice dragon in the sky. The full-force punch of any heavenly god was imbued with the boundless might of heaven and earth, and it transformed into a crimson fist projection that instantly cracked open the dragon's head. Howl! The ice dragon wailed with anguish. In the next instant, its body was pulverized by the mighty force. The dragon's body, which was several dozen kilometers in length, was shattered by the punch. However, the heavenly mountain god didn't even have a chance to withdraw its fist. Countless shards of ice were imbued with the power of wind, creating a tornado of extreme frost that swept toward the heavenly mountain god in a frenzy. Each and every shard of ice was imbued with the extreme slicing power of the immortal tool, as well as the power of wind that could slice through all things. They were like countless miniature blades that sliced through the heavenly mountain god relentlessly. The heavenly mountain god let loose a wail of anguish, and its scorching skin, which was flowing with lava, was frozen solid by the frost. One ice blade after another was imbued with extreme slicing power, and its thick body was being sliced open. One ice, one sword. There were countless swords here. Unlin's face was deathly pale. He had overexerted his heavenly wind power, and that attack had almost completely sapped all of his energy. However, he still forced himself to hold his sword in front of him. This was the best opportunity to kill the heavenly mountain god. 6 Strikes of the War God Tao Sword. Chapter 1578. Unlin's cultivation base wasn't very high, so he could only unleash the first 4 strikes of the 6 strikes of the War God. He didn't have enough power to unleash the 5th and 6th strikes of the Tao Sword and the Divine Sword. However, everything changed when he suddenly discovered that he could imbue the power of the heavenly gods into his technique. He could use the power of the heavenly gods to forcibly break through certain restrictions. Unlin's aura suddenly transformed, and it was as if he had fused with heaven and earth. The inky black evil-slaying sword melded into the night sky. Everything was so natural that it would be very easy for Unlin to overlook its existence if he wasn't paying close attention to it. Beneath Unlin's feet, countless black-veined patterns formed into a net and quickly spread across the ground. Like a spiderweb, it was extremely intricate and beautiful. Each and every black-veined pattern was imbued with extremely profound true intent of a Taoist technique. Some of them were imbued with paramount sword techniques, some were imbued with powerful saber techniques, some were imbued with scorching heat, some were imbued with ice and snow, and there was even the Tao intent of a ruler. Countless black-veined patterns existed independently, but they also intertwined with one another. None of the Tao was independent, but all of the Tao was unique. There were countless black-veined patterns on the ground, as well as countless unique Tao. At the center of the countless Tao intertwined patterns stood a man in a snowy white robe. His aura was completely restrained, but he was imbued with Tao intent. In that instant, he was the ruler of all Tao. What was Tao? Tao was the path forward. Some people walked the Tao with their bodies and aimlessly. Some people walked the Tao with their bodies and minds, and even though there was no destination, there was a direction. The things they held onto, the things they sensed, the things they obtained, all of the observations and gains along the way could be transformed into the Tao beneath their feet. The further they walked, the more grand and spectacular the scenery became. Unlin didn't know what Tao was in the beginning. He didn't even know what a Tao heart was. However, after experiencing so many things and witnessing the birth and death of countless living beings, he had even witnessed the deaths of Tao integration stage super mighty figures a few times. He already had his own understanding of Tao. What was Tao? If you didn't know, then just keep walking forward. Then, look behind you. That's your Tao. On the ground below, inky black-veined patterns extended into infinity with no end in sight. The heavenly mountain god had already been shredded to death by the mystic wind storm. Unlin gripped the evil-slaying sword as a peculiar feeling welled up in his heart. With millions of Taos under his feet and a sword in his hand, he could control the life and death of Taos. The Tao sword is to transform the Tao into a sword. There are billions of Taos in the world, and when they see my Tao, they can only bow down to me. Unlin calmly said. He was very calm and natural, but it was as though this was how it should be. He had already entered a very mysterious state. Everything he saw was the Tao. The heavenly mountain god's Tao was vast and mighty, and all the mountains in this world were as insignificant as ants in comparison. Anyone who looked at him would have to raise their heads and look up, feeling reverence in their hearts. Its Tao vividly displayed the characteristics of the mountain. Anlin saw its Tao. It was so perfect, so desirable. It was the ultimate Tao, like an eternal and inextinguishable radiance. If a normal mighty figure were to witness the heavenly mountain god's Tao, they would probably kneel down and bow down to it. However, Anlin wouldn't do that. He possessed the powers of wind and lightning, and he had never bowed down to anyone. The heavenly mountain god was actually very feeble. It had almost expended all of its energy, and it had been severely wounded over and over again. Even its earthy divine halo was beginning to crack. Anlin closed his eyes and stared at the mighty projection that struck despair into the onlooker's heart. The heavenly Tao is boundless. I have a sword. Anlin raised his evil-slaying sword high into the air before slashing it toward the heavenly mountain god. I can sever all Tao in this world. The boundless black-veined patterns on the ground unleashed peculiar energy fluctuations at the same time before surging toward the heavenly mountain god, as if it were being attacked by countless Tao. The heavenly mountain god howled with agony. Its pupils then contracted as an expression of shock and rage appeared on its face. Anlin, how dare you sever my Tao? Don't you know that I am the heavenly Tao? You will suffer the most terrifying backlash for attacking my Tao. The heavenly mountain god's voice was like a rumbling mountain, as if the entire earth were roaring at the same time. Anlin replied in an indifferent voice, "It's not like I haven't severed the heavenly Tao before." The heavenly mountain god. Countless black-veined patterns suddenly appeared on the heavenly mountain god's majestic body, which enshrouded its entire body while exuding paramount true intent. "You're the one." Anlin raised his sword again. The evil-slaying sword suddenly became a flawless, translucent, snowy white color under the guidance of the Tao sword true intent. Anlin instantly appeared before the heavenly mountain god before slashing his sword down again, upon which a silvery white light flashed through the air. Boom! The sword blade struck the black-veined patterns. The heavenly mountain god let loose another blood-curdling wail, and even its divine halo tremored violently. Su Xiaolan's eyes widened as she looked on at Anlin from afar, as if she was witnessing something unbelievable. She had never encountered such a Tao intent before, and she felt as if a whole new world had been opened up to her as she observed this battle from up close. "You want to sever my Tao? Dream on." The heavenly mountain god's eyes burned like torches as it completely unleashed its terrifying true intent. Its aura was almost substantial, as if it were a boundless Mount Buzhou crushing down upon Anlin's body again. Blood trickled from the corners of Anlin's lips, but he slowly slashed down with his evil-slaying sword to tear apart the black-veined patterns. "Ah!" The heavenly mountain god let loose another blood-curdling cry, as if it was in extreme pain. A determined expression appeared on its face. "Disperse my Tao to the heavens." The black-veined patterns suddenly flew away from the heavenly mountain god's body and were about to return to the heavenly Tao. This was its most powerful escape technique, which allowed it to fuse with the heavenly Tao before finding an opportunity to return to the heavenly Tao. The backlash from dissipating its Tao to the heavens was extremely severe. If it weren't for the fact that it had been forced into a corner, it wouldn't have used this spell technique. The speed at which it dispersed its Tao was extremely fast, and Anlin was completely unable to stop it. The heavenly mountain god glared at the white-robed man before it. "Anlin, I'll remember this. When I return, the black-veined patterns flew into the sky." Anlin's expression shifted upon seeing the dispersing Tao, and his inky black eyes suddenly turned golden as an eternal aura erupted from his body. Time stop. An area within a radius of over a kilometer was instantly sliced into an independent space by an extremely mysterious power. The space was separated from the outside world. Everything in the space began to become motionless, regardless of whether it was the air, the surging energy, the surging lava, or even the black-veined patterns that were about to fly into the sky. Everything became completely still. Everything became completely still. Nothing between heaven and earth could escape the shackles of time. Only one person began to move. Enlil wielded his snowy white, evil-slaying sword and activated his heavenly wind power to its fullest extent. Boundless Tao intent converged upon the sword, and his Tao sword true intent rose to its very peak before crashing down upon the black-veined patterns. Breakthrough! Boundless white divine light erupted from the evil-slaying sword, pulverizing the heavenly mountain god's Tao patterns. Chapter 1579. Time Stop. This was the only time-type spell technique that Enlil could use. Even though this was the only time-type spell technique that could stop relative time, the power of this spell technique was extremely terrifying to the extent that it could even stop the heavenly mountain god. Just from this alone, Enlil could tell that it was on an unimaginable level. Unfortunately, with Enlil's current power, he could only stop time for 1 second. However, that wasn't a pity, as 1 second was enough to decide many things. For example, the heavenly mountain god's Tao patterns were completely destroyed by Enlil's Tao sword. Time resumed its normal flow. Absolute time and relative time converged again. The heavenly mountain god's expression of hatred was still lingering on its face before its Tao patterns were completely pulverized by an extremely powerful power. The heavenly mountain god's eyes widened with incredulity as it stared at the scenes unfolding before its eyes. Who am I? Where am I? What just happened? The heavenly mountain god was completely dumbstruck. Crack, at this moment, the divine halo above its head suddenly cracked open before crumbling. No. How could this be? Didn't I unleash my Tao return to the heavens? The heavenly mountain god stared at the man before it with shock and incredulity on its face. What did you do to me? Enlil slowly sheathed his sword, and the boundless Tao patterns beneath his feet disappeared as he spoke with an indifferent expression. Time stop. The heavenly mountain god felt as if it had been struck by a bolt of lightning, and its entire body seemed to have become an immobile rock as it stared blankly at Enlil. You also possess the power of the heavenly time god? Just a little, Enlil replied modestly. The heavenly mountain god. Why was he being so humble at a time like this? Couldn't he be a little more powerful? It was so humiliating that it had been defeated by a power that it only knew a little about. The heavenly mountain god was still grumbling internally as its body gradually crumbled, and its aura also began to fade. After its Tao patterns were destroyed, there was no need for a life form to exist anymore. Bam! An explosive boom erupted. The heavenly mountain god's body suddenly exploded, sending lava and rubble flying all over the ground. Not even its carcass was left intact. The heavenly mountain god had finally fallen. Xianyuan Cheng and the others were already cheering excitedly. Although they didn't know what had happened, the result was obviously good. The heavenly metal god and heavenly god Jordan's expressions shifted drastically upon seeing this. How could this be? How could the heavenly mountain god die just like that? Heavenly god Jordan murmured to himself with a dazed expression, clearly unable to accept this. The heavenly metal god's eyes darkened. Enlil again? Why is it Enlil again? First it was heavenly goddess Lin Yu, and now even the heavenly mountain god. We can't let him live. Compared to the enemy's shock and disbelief, his teammates felt like they had vented their anger. Ha ha, as expected of the war god of the celestial court. Well done. The celestial Tharch threw his head back and chortled with glee. Even his pursuit of heavenly god Jordan became more ferocious. Chern and the heavenly earth god were still locked in a standoff. The heavenly earth god turned toward Enlil in a rare moment of silence. A smile appeared on Chen's face. What do you think? Do you still think you can win? Who would have thought that he would also possess the power of time? The heavenly earth god shook his head. However, no matter how exceptional he is, he's still going to fall in the end. The higher he flies, the more despair he'll feel when he falls. Chen shook his head. You can only rely on your words now. The handsome youth in linen garments continued, "If you don't leave now, you won't be able to escape either." Hee. The heavenly earth god couldn't help but burst into laughter. "Are you kidding me? There's no place in this world that I can't escape from. Even if Cyril were here, I wouldn't be afraid." Chen Chen didn't say anything else. Instead, he looked at the heavenly earth god in silence. The heavenly earth god raised his chin, and a hint of a smile appeared on his face, as if the death of the heavenly mountain god didn't really affect him. Both sides once again fell into silence, quietly confronting each other. At this moment, a ding-dong suddenly sounded in Enlin's mind. His body shuddered, and he was just about to open his system when a series of ding-dong, 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 ding-dong began to ring in his mind. Holy F***ck. What's going on? Enlin was given a massive fright, and he immediately opened his system. At this moment, several pieces of information popped up in his cultivation method tab at the same time. Congratulations, host, on successfully slaying the heavenly mountain god. Earth-type cultivation method. Earth Lotus Supreme skill has been upgraded to the second stage. Earth Lotus Supreme skill has been upgraded to the third stage. Earth Lotus Supreme skill has been upgraded to the fourth stage. Earth Lotus Supreme skill has been upgraded to the fifth stage. Earth Lotus Supreme skill has been upgraded to the ninth stage. Congratulations, host, on reaching the final stage of your Earth-type cultivation method and obtaining the power of the heavenly mountain god. Enlin was completely dumbstruck upon seeing this string of information. Bad *SS. He paused momentarily, but he really couldn't find the right words to describe this feeling, so he could only use this sentence to express the emotions in his heart. To be able to cultivate a cultivation method to the max level and obtain a new power of the heavenly mountain was undoubtedly a massive surprise to him. At the same time, he also came to a realization. As expected, if he wanted to obtain the power of the heavenly mountain, he had to personally end the life of a heavenly god. In the next instant, an enormous amount of information and true intent surged into his mind in a frenzy, threatening to make his head explode. Ah! Enlin clasped his hands over his head in agony. Enlin! Su Xiaolan hurriedly flew to Enlin's side before wrapping her arms around the man who was about to fall to the ground with a panicked expression. What's wrong? Don't scare me, I'm fine. I'm just preparing to evolve. Enlin gritted his teeth. Su Xiaolan. Even though she didn't know what Enlin was talking about, Su Xiaolan still protected Enlin by her side as she looked at the remaining heavenly gods with a cautious expression. Heavenly God Jordan had activated his 8 divine halos, but he was still being pummeled by the celestial Dharch. Black Spirit Snake and White Spirit Snake were also closing in on him, so he was clearly in a dire situation. The heavenly metal god was still engaged in a battle to the death with the ancient dragon empress. Chen Chen and the heavenly earth god were still looking at one another with a loving expression on their faces. Su Xiaolan heaved a light sigh of relief upon seeing this. Thankfully, there were no other enemies who could deal with her and Enlin, so they could rest for a while. After resting for a while, Enlin's expression was no longer as pained as before. However, his entire body was drenched in hot sweat, and he was panting heavily. Are you all right? Su Xiaolan's eyes lit up with a smile. Enlin nodded with difficulty. I'm much better now. He rubbed his head against Su Xiaolan's chest as he spoke. It's all thanks to you holding on to me that I was able to recover so quickly. Su Xiaolan blushed, and she wanted to push Enlin away, but she couldn't bring herself to do so after a moment of hesitation. Have some shame. Chapter 1580. Enlin was extremely elated after obtaining the power of the heavenly earth god. However, his energy had been completely depleted, and his body was in an extremely bad state due to overexertion. He couldn't activate his vital energy at all, and his consciousness was extremely feeble, so his vision was blurry. It was as if he had masturbated over 10,000 times in a row, and he felt like he was on the brink of death. Thankfully, he had Xiaolan to hug. And Lin felt like all of his efforts had been worth it as he basked in her soft and gentle touch and smelled her faint fragrance. Oi! Where are you rubbing your head? Su Xiaolan's expression darkened. She discovered that Lin was rubbing his head against her chest in her arms. Su Xiaolan almost threw Lin to the ground, but she thought about it for a moment before pushing his head onto her shoulder and giving him a warning look before relenting. Lin was simply too exhausted, and he was carried by Su Xiaolan to the Blood Soul Jade coffin before being placed into it. Lin was looking forward to carrying a dead man in his arms, but that didn't happen. Su Xiaolan carried a coffin on her back as she observed the battlefield with a cautious expression. Lin suddenly sighed with emotion within the coffin. In the beginning, it was Su Xiaolan who had used too many mystic techniques, so Lin placed Su Xiaolan into the coffin and fought with her on his back. After that, both he and Su Xiaolan were severely wounded, and the two of them were carried by the Vermilion Bird Princess to escape. Now, he was the one lying in the coffin while Su Xiaolan carried the coffin around. This was AF** King Reincarnation. So the coffin was the MVP? Lin really had a lot to say. After a long while, he swallowed 2 regenerative immortal pills and sat down in the coffin to recuperate. As he swallowed the immortal pills, Lin suddenly discovered that his recent battles had been extremely wasteful. He had used up more than 10 immortal pills, and he had even blown up an immortal artifact. The cost of this battle must be at least 10 million spirit stones, right? Thinking of this, he couldn't help but feel a dull pain in his heart. How many days would he have to be a chef to earn back that amount? If it wasn't for the fact that he had obtained the power of the Heavenly Mountain, he really would have vomited blood. After all, 10 million spirit stones was his entire fortune. 1%? Lin faltered slightly before suddenly realizing that he still had 1 billion spirit stones in his storage ring. In an instant, his heart no longer ached. When he thought up to here, he popped another 2 immortal pills into his mouth and happily swallowed them. I don't care if I have excess nutrition or not, I'm rich. Just then, the system in his mind beeped once more. Ding dong! Lin's body trembled. He thought to himself, now that I'm lying in the coffin weakly, will the system come up with something to trick me again? He nervously opened the system interface. At this time, he discovered that the Special Missions tab was flashing with a frightening light. It's over. It really is a trap. Lin was in despair. None of the Special Missions tab were kind. He opened the Special Missions tab with despair etched on his face, and his eyes abruptly widened upon seeing the content of the mission. Detected that the host's Earth Lotus Supreme skill has been cultivated to the 9th stage. Now assigning the following special missions: Frowny Face, Cultivate the Evergreen Technique, Divine Liquid Creation Technique, Divine Weapon Origin Energy Technique, and Wings of True Fire Technique to the 9th stage respectively. Time limit, 3 years. Reward for mission success: 5 elements combination, phenomenal success, Body of the War God. Reward for mission failure, an extra little brother. A note: this mission cannot be rejected. Lin, the severely wounded man lying in the coffin, couldn't help but look up at the sky with a melancholy expression. What did the reward for mission failure mean by an extra little brother? Were they trying to hide the fact that an extra little brother was a reward? Lin roared with tears streaming down his face. I choose to be impotent. Wah! The man sobbed uncontrollably in the coffin. Su Xiaolan was given a massive fright, and she turned around to look at Lin with astonishment etched on her face. Lin, are you crazy? Why did you choose to be impotent? The beautiful divine phoenix maiden's eyes were already glistening with tears, and a look of rage and rebuke appeared on her face, as if she were more than willing to turn into a slug. Lin almost threw up a mouthful of blood upon seeing Su Xiaolan's words. He couldn't ask Su Xiaolan whether she liked him to have an extra little brother or whether she liked him to be impotent. If he did that, The answer he would receive would most likely be neither. Let's break up. You're no longer a man. Of course, there could be other possible answers, however. Unlin wasn't a pervert. He would rather be impotent. Wait. Unlin suddenly came to a realization. He might not necessarily fail the mission, so why was he thinking about the tragic fate that awaited him if he failed? This was not a good way of thinking. He focused his gaze on the cultivation method's interface. His evergreen technique was already at the third stage, the divine liquid creation technique was at the first stage, the divine weapon origin energy was at the first stage, and the wings of true fire was at the second stage. He had to cultivate all of them to the ninth stage. Unlin suddenly looked up into the sky, and he felt like his future was a bleak one. How was he supposed to cultivate all 4 cultivation methods to the ninth stage in 3 years? Wasn't that basically asking for his life? He didn't really care about the difficulties, but he hadn't even received the mission requirements for progressing to the next stage, so how was he supposed to progress? Unlin really wanted to curse at the system. However, he wasn't at the end of the line. Wasn't his Earth Lotus Supreme skill reaching the ninth stage the best proof of that? He still had a way to get to the next stage, however. This method could be described as a different kind of hellish difficulty. The power of the heavenly gods could elevate Earth-type cultivation methods to the pinnacle. As such, the powers of metal, wood, water, and fire could also be elevated to the pinnacle. 4 heavenly gods. Unlin was on the verge of tears. Did they really think the heavenly gods were Debai's vegetables that could be plucked from anywhere? He and Xiaolan had almost died fighting the heavenly mountain god, and that was even with the celestial Thearka's help and Bai Ling's help. Next, he had to defeat at least 4 heavenly gods before he could complete this mission. In other words, he had to risk his life 4 times. True superstar, hellish difficulty. Unlin discovered that the series of missions for the body of the war god were extremely unfriendly to his little brother. The first mission for his little brother was for the embryonic body of the war god, which required him to absorb 10 golden realm essence crystals and become a eunuch for 100 years if he failed. The second mission for his little brother was for the initial success stage body of the war god, which required him to absorb 100 golden realm essence crystals and become a eunuch for 10,000 years if he failed. What about now? Sure enough, the phenomenal success stage body of the war god mission was for his little brother again. It required him to cultivate all 5 elemental cultivation methods to the 9th stage, and the penalty for failure was even more severe. He would have to have a second child and have another little brother. Unlin was extremely distressed. He had to find a way to complete this mission as soon as possible. He couldn't help but turn toward the location where the ancient dragon empress and the heavenly metal god were battling. Wasn't the power of the heavenly metal god a metal element? With this in mind, he slapped the lid of the coffin with all his might. Hurry, help me up. I can still fight.